see. It came up on his the same way.
I'm sorry?
That website came up the same way on his phone as I'm getting it. Two different ones.
What website is that?
That's weird because it comes up the right one on my phone. I looked today.
And we tested it on ours.
Were you connected to internet here? That could be why.
Well, Matt's on it here.
Oh, yeah.
No, I'm not using the
No.
internet.
It's not working. I mean, it says that it is recording.
Yeah. Try it like at home.
But the live is not going.
No, we have that many people. Well, I guess 2,900.
Oh, that's from 2016.
Oh, never mind.
Are we all gonna get one of these? Did you bring these? Are we gonna get one?
I don't know what that is.
It's everything you need to know.
Oh, okay. Everything. I have my little book. Does that have it?
What little book is that? Robert Jewell of Orders. Ooh, I didn't see that.
Yeah.
It's like once I get a cold, I just keep it the rest of the winter.
Once it goes down,
Just a little bit.
this is gonna be the happiest. Pretty quiet in here. Oh, that's right.
We're waiting for the pin to drop.
Oh, is that what it is?
Break the silence.
So Tom, this is you get to start this work session.
I'd like to call this work session to order for April 8th of 2024. Are we going to do a attendance?
So what we'll do is just write down who is here tonight, unless you'd like to do a roll call. That's your call.
Just was asking.
Yep.
I'm fine with just writing it down.
Okay.
All rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So I'd like to introduce Patrick Rondinelli is a DOLA rep, and we have Jason is on our planning commission. Cash Snooks and Matt Nyberg are currently on our planning commission, and after the 16th, they'll be board of trustees. So we also have the leadership team behind you, Patrick. So it's your show.
Thanks, Katie. Appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for your time today and tonight and what we'll be going through here. This great combination of this a mix of the people that are here in the room for me to get a chance to talk to and present to. It says elected official training up there, just to give a little bit of background. This, one of the things we do with DOLA, and I'll get into that a little bit more here in just a bit, is working with especially elected officials and brand newly elected officials of what your role is as an elected official, working together as a board, working with your staff, working with citizens, all those type of things. But a lot of the training that you'll see in here is relevant to planning commission members too, and then especially to your staff. It's always great for the staff to hear what I'm telling all of you, so we're all on the same page as we move forward in your work, doing all the critical work and important work for your community. So, next slide, please. We'll go through this and hopefully be able to not go necessarily till 8:30 tonight, but you know, it's on 8 till 8:25, I think, on the agenda. But we have a lot of things to cover tonight. I'm going to move kind of fast in some of it, but I'm really open to your feedback. If there's things that I'm going through and you're like, hey, explain that a little bit more. Let's spend a little more time discussing that. By all means, just tell me. Or if it's, Patrick, you're making us all fall asleep, move a little faster. Just give me that signal too. I'm always happy to do that. Once again, it's not like, okay, we're going to save questions for the end or anything along those lines. I'll be doing a lot of talking. I'll be going kind of fast with my talking just to make sure I get through all the information, but tell me to slow down. But more importantly, don't hesitate to interact, interject, ask questions, you know, offer stories and examples, anything along those lines. You know, well, what about this? You know, this is something we dealt with before, what, you know, and how we handled it. What do you think? You know, by all means, just participate in the conversation. It's very much a two-way participation with this. So, next. First, real quick, and I'll come back to this later, but if you just take a minute, pick one of these questions, have an answer for it. You can write it down if you need to, or just have it ready in the back of your head. But I want to, there's a couple times in the slides that I'll have some questions for you all that just, they're there to help start you thinking about what's going on, what we're here for, what we're doing and why, those type of things. And I'll ask you to share some of that information. You don't have to. I'm not one of those speakers that calls on people, you know, like a teacher would or something along those lines. So, you know, please, because I'm usually the guy that's looking down when they say, let's participate, or when they do citizen, or I mean group participation. Katie and I were just, and Nicole and I were at the conference last week, and whenever they say it's time to do a participation, I usually go out the door the other way. So, but anyway, just think of one of those if you would. All right, what we will cover today, as I said, welcome and introductions, talk a little bit about DOLA, Department of Local Affairs, and the Division of Local Government, what my role is and what I do to support all of you in your community. Roles and responsibility for all of you, relationship building, obviously, and then talk some about establishing goals and setting priorities. Will also be some of the goals of this session, and this is based on some conversations I had with Katie ahead of time, but we can add to this list too. And I know you guys have a copy of this that you received now, but as we go through and depending on where the conversation goes, I'll be taking some notes. I may be jotting down some things and then following up with all of you afterwards, just saying, hey, based on what you said. So goals of this session right now, just understanding that relationship between the state and local government. And I preface that by saying, while I work for the state, I come from local government. That's where I started 20 years ago in this field. That is where my roots are. Like Katie, I served on the CML executive board for 4 years. They belong strongly in local control and local government. I'm right there with it. And so I'm a huge advocate about that. So I want to make sure I'm just clear and be able to talk a little bit about that, because some would say that lines between state and local government have become a little blurred in the last few years, right, Katie? So we've seen a lot of that. As I said, you know, talk about the roles of elected officials and with your professional staff, and you all are very fortunate to have a great professional staff that's here as part of this community. And then the idea of communication. I'll talk a little bit more about communication and its importance, and how often that tends to be the breakdown is in the communication that when things are working with a team and all the issues that you got to go through. So, real quick, Colorado Department of Local Affairs. This is DOLA's mission, strengthening Colorado communities. We were created just over 50 years ago from a blue ribbon panel that the governor at the time had assembled to work on building that relationship between the state and local governments. State's constitution talks heavily about local control, that it starts with the local governments in the communities that are out there. And as we all know, there's a lot of diversity in the state of Colorado. And so DOLA was formulated to be that liaison between the state and local governments, to bring resources to help all of you to do your day-to-day job in serving your communities, but also be a voice for all of you back up to the state and share your information that's going on up there. Some of the other key components that we work on and some of the departments that are there within the Department of Local Affairs, the Executive Director's Office. Our Executive Director is a woman by the name of Maria DeCambria. Maria is on the Governor's Cabinet. We are a state agency, but we're the smallest state agency that there is. We have just over 200 employees compared to like CDOT or Department of Corrections or CDPHE, any of those entities that are out there. But we have a lot of different divisions within DOLA. We have the Division of Property Taxation. You may not have heard about property taxation a lot this last year with the changes in assessed values of property tax collection that's going on in all the communities. DPT has been playing a role in that, trying to interpret what has been passed by the legislature and or voters over the years and incorporating that into the local governments because that's such an important revenue source for local governments. Board of Assessment Appeals, that's not something you guys are ever really going to deal with. It's more on a county level. I don't know about you all, but when I looked at my property tax valuation this last year, my jaw hit the table about what my house had done. There's a process in state statute that allows you to appeal that to your county assessment appeals, and then you can appeal that further up to the state if you want to. More importantly, though, and the two agencies that you would primarily work with out of DOLA are the Division of Housing and the Division of Local Government. Division of Housing is our sister agency. As the name implies, they're everything and all about housing. And I know your staff has been very familiar with DOH, and a counterpart that I have that works for DOH, Shirley Diaz. And then I work in the Division of Local Government, where we provide technical and financial assistance to local governments. Our job is to help you do your job the best that you can for your community and provide you whatever resources you may need to do that. We're not here to tell you what you must do. We're not here to tell you how to do it unless you ask. And even then, it's not, this is how you do it. I can say, here's best practices, or here's examples of what other communities have done, or examples of what similar challenges that other communities have faced and how they handled it, what they learned from it, what they didn't learn from it, what mistakes they made, what things they did right. We're also facilitators. We try and bring everybody together. Say that we're the face of state government for local governments, meaning we got an issue going on with CDPHE and we're not exactly sure who to talk to or what to deal with it. You give me a call, I'll help track that down. I'm here for you guys. With that. Division of Local Government, as I said, we work with local governments, so counties, municipalities, special districts. Those are the three entities that we work with. These are some of the groups within the Division of Local Government. Financial assistance. They're there about all the financial analysis, and I'll talk a little bit more about this. I'm on the field team. I'll talk more here. State demography. Technically, the state demography is in the executive director's office, but they work most closely with us in the Division of Local Government. The state demographer, Elizabeth Gardner, if you've ever had a chance to hear her speak, it's all on the forecasting, and there's some incredible tools that the demography office puts together that is relevant to us in small rural Colorado. It's not just the big cities or the big counties that you can pull information from. They have a lot of great information to help you get statistics and information to help you make informed decisions as you're moving forward. So once again, Katie, Nicole, and I were at a conference in Durango last week. Elizabeth was down there and spoke a few times, and she's phenomenal. Community development's another group that works a lot with local governments. It's all about land use things. They do planning commission training very specific. Like I said, I took some of their slides that they use that you'll see a little bit later on this. Some of our grant programs that we're doing right now around housing that aren't through the Division of Housing, they're more through the Division of Local Government, that's community development. Town of Bayfield's been very fortunate to get some grant funding for them here in the recent past. And then just technical assistance on a wide range of things. So real quick, like I said, Community Development Office, planning and land use practices. That's what they work in and offer assistance at. Once again, we're not here to tell you what you must do. We're here as a resource to help you understand what you can do, what you can't do, what you may be limited to be able to do by a wide range of things. Best practices in regards to comprehensive planning, land use code, just overall general planning, a lot of wide range of opportunities that are there. The Main Street program is through the CDO. Main Street program is about economic development in your Main Street, revitalization and growth, and they follow the National Main Street program, which is a extensive program that really looks at a lot of matrix and strategies to help Main Streets and that critical aspect of your economic development in your community. And then they work a little bit on the resilience and hazard mitigation, for example, like flood recovery, water resources, those type of things they can advise. Local government services, this is the finance group. They help with a lot of the files and public records that you as the town are responsible for. You adopt a budget every year. You submit your budget to the state. Our local government services team, they have all the budgets from every government entity in the state of Colorado, and they will do some basic analysis on that, make sure you're in compliance with everything that you need to be. If you're not, they'll just let you know if you're not in compliance on those type of things. They can provide some budget analysis, some high-level analysis, and once again talk a little bit more on the best practices of what's going on. Captain's going to be more familiar with a lot of their services that they provide. They provide a lot of the spreadsheets and formula spreadsheets that we have to follow in regards to when we're developing budgets. Tabor, especially the property tax, and all the revenue restrictions that have come and gone in just the last few years in regards to that. They do a lot of help with special districts. You guys do have some special districts that overlap into your boundaries. Unlike you all, that you'll get pretty attuned and used to being in town government and municipal government, special districts. A lot of times those boards don't meet as often. They're not dealing with the day-to-day things that you are, and it's very kind of foreign and unfamiliar with them, and they need a little bit more hand-holding on the technical side. Our team provides a little bit of that to help on that. And they have simple things like how to run an election. You know, once again, you've got professional staff that can run an election for you. A lot of special districts don't. It's a board member who is tasked with trying to run an election, and they're like, I don't know where to start. How do I legally do this in a proper way? And we provide those services over there. And then just a little side with that, we track, like I said, all the public records and files for all governmental entities. And there's a link on our website where you can go and look at this. You can break it down by community name. You can look at it by county and just say what are all the districts within La Plata County that overlap, and you can see all their information, including copy of their budget, copy of their election results, those type of things that are out there. Already mentioned the demography office and a lot of the information that they provide and some of the entities they work with. They do everything from assisting the feds with the census every 10 years to their annual analysis that they do, working with the state universities and pulling together a lot of data. Once again, when you go to their website, you can get down to very specific community analysis, and they can show just a breakdown and off of data for the town of Bayfield's. They show you housing numbers, populations, migration, out-migration, those type of statistics. And then if you ever want a deeper dive, staff contact me, and we can get in touch with them and they can do some of that extra research, and they're always happy to present. Elizabeth loves to get out in the field. Actually, all of her staff love to get out in the field as much as they can. Sometimes they can't, so sometimes it's by video that we have a presentation from them. But one of the benefits of living in the region we do, and I tell my colleagues all the time, I live in the most beautiful region in the entire state of Colorado. It's a lot of times pretty easy to get people to come down here and visit. So field services, so that's where I'm in. We have the state divided into 8 regions. I'm in the southwest part of the state there. I live in Luray. I've been there for 25 years. My wife actually grew up in Luray County. We raised our 2 sons from there. And I cover from Montrose County down through the Four Corners all the way over to Pagosa Springs and Archuleta County. There's 8 regional managers across the state. We all live in the regions that we serve. We all come from local government backgrounds. Majority of us are former town managers. That's what I did. I was the city administrator in Luray for 13 years before I left to join DOLA. So as I said, I've been doing this for 20 years now. Chris LeMay, I know a lot of you know Chris LeMay. Chris is a regional manager. He's up in our north central region now. And so he got to deal with a lot of the Marshall Fire issues a couple years ago, and still, I think he's still on every other week meetings about Marshall Fire recovery issues. But like I said, all of us come from local government. We have one that's a former county commissioner, a couple that were staff. The rest of us are former town managers in one form or fashion with it. And we love working within the communities that we serve. As I mentioned before, we provide technical and financial assistance. I'm going to touch base a little bit on the financial assistance first, and then I'll talk on the technical base, because this is what we're doing tonight, some of the technical assistance that we provide. So we have a number of different grant funding programs that we administer. The largest and most popular is the Energy and Mineral Impact Assistance Fund, or EIAF. The state collects severance tax from extraction industry, so oil, gas, mining, all of those entities pay a certain amount of tax money to the state, and that money gets distributed back into communities through a number of different avenues. Our main one is through the EIAF program. We have 3, well, I'll talk a little bit more about those cycles here in a minute. We also administer the Community Development Block Grant, or CDBG. That's a federal grant funding program. The state receives annual federal funds for CDBG, and then we administer that, and we have a cycle to do that. The Rural Economic Development Initiative, or READY, is a grant program that we've got going. Conservation Trust Funds, that's money that comes directly, it's directly distributed to local governments. Marijuana Impact, Gaming Impact Assistance. Gaming Impact is limited to a number of communities in the state of Colorado. Not all communities have access to the Gaming Impact program. It's for communities that are impacted by the negative impacts of gaming. You're technically eligible to apply for the Gaming Impact Assistance funds. Primarily goes to areas like law enforcement, helping them deal with gaming-related response calls, sometimes jail, offset the costs of jailing people that have been incarcerated related to gaming impact. District attorney, the district attorney's office in this region gets some money back from that. It doesn't cover all the expenses related to a community with that, but it's there to help. Yeah.
What is the marijuana impact assistance?
Yeah, that's a program that primarily goes to law enforcement, and what it is intended is to help local law enforcement to offset the cost of illegal marijuana issues in a community. So, if you have grow operations, for example, legal grow operations that are licensed, it is a program. It doesn't have a lot of them, but it's a program that law enforcement is allowed to apply for and get some reimbursement back for those illegal operations. All of our grant programs are reimbursement-based. A lot of them are reimbursement-based. Marijuana is one of the few that we actually give you some money up front, and then you got to document that you've used it all, and then you you don't use it a certain amount of time, you gotta give it back. It varies. As much as I don't like bureaucracy has a place, because it's taxpayer dollars, right? We all have to show the accountability for it. I know a lot of law enforcement don't like that program because it's not a lot of money and it's a lot of record keeping and documentation you gotta do, but that's what it's for. And then strong communities and Prop 123, those were affordable housing programs that got stood up in the last couple of years. I mean, we've all been, through a lot, go all the way back to the pandemic and then some of the things that have been occurring over time. Obviously, affordable housing is a priority everywhere. That doesn't mean it's your only priority. We all have a lot of things on our plate. We talk about water resources, drought issues. We talk about homelessness. We talk about a whole wide marijuana issues, whatever it may be. But affordable housing is like one of the issues statewide. Different funding sources that we can respond to. That homeowners can provide funding directly to the general Prop 123 was actually voted by all the state presidents. We also, through our grant programs, real quick, we do some partnership with some of the other state agencies that have grant programs of various levels of complexity. The primary ones we do partnerships with are, for example, CDPHE. We do a lot of construction grant programs, so assisting on water and wastewater systems, whether it's treatment and distribution or collection and treatment again. And a lot of that's through partnership with CDPHE and some of the programs that they have in the state revolving loan fund. We do a lot of grant projects that focus on renewable and clean energy and work in partnership with the Energy Office and then broadband. Everybody, that's one of those priorities, and they've been very active in that. Broadband Office is a little bit awkward right now because for the longest time, DOLA is the state agency funding broadband projects, and we've been doing it and being very successful. And in fact, we're really doing some great things through the southwest part of the state right now. But the broadband office has been stood up in the last couple of years. The governor determined that that was a priority and created an entire office. And so you got a group of people that have been trying to stand up an office and then figure out how to handle some of the federal funding that's been coming to the state, which has some strings attached to it because it's the feds. It's not the flexibility that we in the state, when it's just our own programs, could create on this. So we still partner a lot with that and try to help out communities on the broadband side. So Energy and Mineral Impact Assistance Fund, as I said before, this comes from state severance tax. That severance tax comes to state and then it's used for a wide range of different things. The Department of Natural Resources, which is another state agency, is primarily funded through state severance tax. There's a whole bunch of programs that they do, including Parks and Wildlife and wolf reintroduction, a lot. DNR, they oversee a lot of the mining, oil and gas exploration and regulations associated with that. But some of that comes to DOLA. And then, as I said, our task is to redistribute that money back into local governments, especially governments that have been more adversely impacted by the extraction industry. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But we do it through two different ways. We do have a direct distribution program, and it's when the town receives annually a certain amount of money, your share into that state revenue that comes in from that tax money, and it varies. It's created by a formula that factors in a number of different things, including how active the oil and gas industry is in your region, within your boundaries. It looks at all oil and gas industry related companies have to submit annual residency reports for all their employees. So they don't list, employee XYZ lives here, but they list, that I have an employee that lives within the Easttown boundaries. We have 10 employees that live within the East County boundaries, those type of things. Those numbers are all calculated into a formula, and then that formula is applied to all counties and municipalities in the state, and it's distributed back into it. It can vary, fluctuate, depending on what's happening in the industry in any given year. When I was at Uray, for years, we would only get like $5,000, $7,000, $8,000, but then we had a silver mine open up, and then we got $80,000. So, it could really change a lot. As I said before, a lot of communities, go ahead and do it. A lot of the other districts are out there, so the county gets funding from it, all the municipalities, special districts. In your region, your districts, some of your districts are pretty active in seeking grant money from us. Upper Pine just got a grant from us for their new fire station, right? The fire district was there. Once again, some of the other metro and water districts in their region utilize it. Clark County is work with and aggressive in seeking grant funding from us. And so is Ignacio, Pagosa Springs, Archuleta County, Mancos, Montezuma County, our whole region. Everybody really tries to tap into this funding quite a bit. We have
So-
3 cycles a year.
Just real quick,
Sure.
the fire department came out of the Energy and Mineral Impact Fund, not the DOLA.
Well, so that fund is the grant program that's run by DOLA. So Chief Evans did come and follow the same process that you guys would or will be. You guys have got an active grant with us right now, and it's one of these tier 2 applications, and that's what Chief Evans did, and there's a process to go through. It's the same program. So we have 3 cycles a year. We have roughly $20 million available each cycle to distribute statewide, so $60 million. And I say roughly because once again that number can fluctuate with the state's election circumstance in any given year. During the pandemic, we were lucky to have $20 million the entire fiscal year. We actually went down around 2 cycles a year during the pandemic. But since the pandemic, oil and gas industry is doing pretty well. I would argue maybe not as well in our region as the Weld County area. Weld County, I'll be honest, Weld County generates but that said, there are a lot of other counties that do produce the product county is up there. And actually, I was talking before about these formulas that are calculated to figure out the distribution. All 64 counties are also calculated into a formula, and every county receives an energy impact score from 0 to 10. The product county is actually so you guys are like so when you submit an application to us, it's the town of Wakefield. There's a question on the application that we have to number. But it's not, it doesn't mean that if you're a lower number of community, you can get funding from us. We still try to really so we do a wide range of projects through this. So we have 2 different levels of grant funding. Tier 1 is up to $200,000. Tier 2 is up to $1 million. As I mentioned before, fire station.
Senior Center also was a big contributor.
A lot of broadband.
So with the severance payments, does that apply to reservation also?
That's a really good question. So no, the tribes are technically not eligible for this funding. It's actually called out in statute that the tribes are not eligible for this funding. And there's some reasons to believe that. One, they're recognized as a sovereign nation agreements with regards to that. 2, the tribes do not pay tax on this. They do not pay tax. I was not part of the discussions that created the statute, that created the program, but I've been told, and I would guess, there was some conversation that there were certain state legislators that said, well, then the tribe shouldn't be eligible to get any of that money. If they're not contributing to it, they shouldn't be able to get this money. So they are not eligible for energy impact. Now, that does not mean that they don't participate in projects that did receive area impact money. The largest one in the area right now is the big CDOT project there at Farmington Hill right now. We're contributing $1 million to that. The tribes community contributed a lot to that project. CDOT technically cannot apply for AI grant funding, no other state agencies, only local governments. In that particular case, that $1 million that we're contributing to as that project is going through La Plata County for a lot of their connections to their county roads to the new highway system up there, and then the restoration of Farmington Hill once the new bypass is opened up and the old highway is torn up and restored to natural conditions. Just real quick before I go on that one, in addition though, if you saw on that slide earlier in blue, there were some initiatives. State service tax money has been doing really well. As I mentioned before, we actually have slightly more than $20 million these last couple cycles. We have $30 million these last two, and we anticipate we'll have $30 million this next cycle. We, in addition to that, have these slight initiatives. We have three. One's called More Housing Now, one is called the Climate Resiliency Challenge, and one is called Main Street Live. And each of those have $10 million. Thank you, Nicole. Each of those have their own set aside of $10 million available statewide. This particular cycle that we're in right now, which closed on April 1st, the applications were due by April 1st, the town of Bayfield had applied for More Housing Now project for us. So that we have those set asides. Those set asides though, they're only funded for that certain amount until we run out of money, and then our executive director makes the decision if she can replenish those pots of money, if we've got it available, or she may shift some things around. I suspect because housing is the priority right now in so many areas, we will see that $10 million get allocated out this cycle, probably another $10 million reinvested into that program for the August cycle. The Climate Resiliency Challenge is an example. That's really geared towards renewable, clean energy, anchor institutions, resiliency hubs, a lot of terms associated with that. We don't have the time to necessarily go into right now. There's not a lot of those projects occurring right now, and right now that program will probably not be fully funded, and I expect in that August cycle that one will not get recharged. That August say, hey, we're going to shift into housing because we know that's our highest demand. So we really try to respond to what we're hearing from local governments. Yeah. Community Development Block Grant. As I said before, this is a federal program. It's annual, so it's a one cycle a year. It just closed in February for this year's cycle. This one's a little bit difficult because we never know how much the state's going to get. We usually receive somewhere between $3 and $3.5 million to be distributed statewide, so it's not a big program like Energy Impact, but it's all driven by federal dollars, and until the feds adopt the budget, and Congress adopts a budget, and it goes through its process to allocate it out to the state. We usually receive our money sometime in the May, June time frame. Our process, because it's a federal program, it's got some additional requirements that you do not see in some of our other projects or our other programs. There's a lot of hand-holding that we do collectively with communities when they see that funding. But it's really a good program for looking at these low to moderate income type programs. I always talk about the city of Montrose. They are experts at using this program. They work with their nonprofits in their community. The city manager there told me a story years ago. He said, a lot of our nonprofits within our community provide services that we as the local government either can't or we're not supposed to be involved in, or we shouldn't be involved in, but that doesn't mean that those services aren't as critical to our community as the services we provide as the town and the municipality, right? And so they support those nonprofits by applying for CDBG funding on behalf of those programs, and then they basically pass through those dollars to those nonprofit agencies. They've done some great work up in Montrose with that. Some other communities are starting to take advantage of that. Progressive Springs is another example here close by. Next one.
Can you give just a couple quick examples of
Sure.
what kind of
Sure. So in
projects?
Progressive Springs, as an example, we helped with the charter school there to acquire their building. And then we're also helping with their It's a vocational program, a skills program that they're developing, Build Better Pagosa, and trying to do that. In Montrose, they've helped Boys and Girls Club remodel a new facility for them to expand their services. Center for Mental Health helped them with their services. All Points Transit, a transit center for them and their services. A place called Pig Place, which provides medical services to low and moderate income families, all under one roof. So a low-income family can come in and see a pediatrician, see a dentist, and see a dermatologist, all in the same facility, just through a referral program. Their food bank, their food pantry is funded through CDBG, wide range of programs. Yes.
I believe, don't they sometimes fund homeless shelters, things like that? I used to direct one in Virginia, and I think we had that funding.
CDBG can be used for that. The state, though, has some other programs to help with those type of services, and those are a little bit less cumbersome, because as I said before, CDBG has its federal rules and regulations that you gotta follow. So I think some communities find some of those easier programs to do that here in Colorado versus some of the other states. Yeah, each state has a different type of program of how they administer CDBG. This is how DOLA does it for Colorado. Next one is READY program, as I mentioned before, Rural Economic Development Initiative. It's in a program right now. It literally just closed a couple weeks ago. It's a once-a-year cycle. It's about job creation. It was a program created by the legislature. It annually only has $750,000 statewide. Once again, it's not a big program, but it's really geared towards, once again, job creation, economic development. And when I started, that $750,000, we would receive just about that many requests statewide. Obviously, through the pandemic and things, local governments are looking at economic development a lot different than they did 10 years ago or 20 years ago, especially. Right now, this cycle we have about $1.5 million in requests with 16 applications statewide. Just in my region here, I got the city of Durango, Southwest Cog, Region 9, and town of Mancos all have applications with me through this one. What I would just say overall is any of our grant programs, any grant program you're dealing with, whether it's in DOLA or anywhere else right now, they're all super competitive right now. There's a wide range of reasons for that. A lot of communities have a lot of money that they're doing well. You know, sales tax numbers are doing well. A lot of communities still have stimulus money that's out there that they received over the last half dozen years through a number of resources. The state, with the money they've received and been pushing it into other programs, there's a lot of opportunity out there, and a lot of communities are trying to take advantage of that. And so our programs are highly competitive. READY is no different with that. As I said before, though, you know, local governments really took a different role in economic development over the last 5 years, and READY's become pretty popular with that. Unfortunately, the legislature has not kept up with that and increased the funding. They did 1 year during the pandemic. They boosted it from $750,000. They gave an additional $5 million to the program, and that was 1 year only, and now we've been back to $750,000 a year. But we have to report annually. Kate Gibert, who's our program manager of that, has to present a report to the state legislature and show how many jobs were created by that funding.
Can you give an example of a small community like Bayfield that created a great economic initiative that the money really served well for?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of communities use it to develop an economic development type position, whether it's directly through the governmental entity or in a partnership. Silverton, San Juan County are an example. They've done an excellent job. They created the San Juan County Economic Development Council, Economic Development Center. I can't remember the exact framework on that, but it's the county and the town coming together and really working on this, and they've done some really cool programs that they're developing with their local businesses to help do that. And a wide range from looking at and evaluating their land use code and their master plan and reprioritizing where economic development is in that, to facade improvement programs, bringing in resources to help local businesses, whether it's startup information, so trainings and resources to help somebody who says, I've got an idea but I don't know where to start, to actual counselors to help with coming in and evaluating, hey, I want to create more of an online presence for my business, and they've got resources that would help with that. So a wide range of programs like that.
So that would be a new business coming to town, and we would direct them to one of these resources that we had created
Right.
that could really help boost their ability to go online.
Right, exactly.
Got it.
Exactly.
Okay.
Another one that I'll point out is MORP over in Montezuma County, the Montezuma Orchard Restoration Project. They're a nonprofit entity, but Southwest COG was a grant money and gave them some money to build their facility where they store a lot of the apple products that they're bringing in. And MORP has done a lot to develop that industry. Everything from best irrigation and growing practices to a lot of the orchard owners to how to get their product to market and marketing their product and the varieties of products that could come from the apple industry, from cider production obviously to all the wide ranging. MORP did a lot of that, but they needed a building, a facility to do that. Some ready funding went to help fund that building for them to be able to expand those services. So that's an example too.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Do you have industrial parks on there? Is that something you see municipalities
Yeah.
using?
Yep, a lot of municipalities will identify an industrial park, and where it talks about that infrastructure grant, some of the infrastructure for an industrial park, we build that. Another example, it's not a small town, Montrose is small compared to Denver or the West Slope, right? But we all know Montrose is not a small town. But the Colorado Outdoors, if anybody's familiar with Colorado Outdoors, some ready money went to that. They've actually used a number of different grant programs to really get Colorado Outdoors there, but that's that whole basis of an idea of business incubator facility and providing the infrastructure and reducing those costs to start up businesses to help them get started with that. So, but yeah, it's done everything from business parks to incubator kitchens to a wide range of things.
So Colorado Outdoors is a part of the READY program?
The city of Montrose received some funding to support their partnership with Colorado Outdoors and Mayfly that they did there. Conservation trust funds, like I said, that's a direct distribution to communities. I'm not gonna touch base on it. Katie and Kathy can talk more about what you guys have for your CTF, but you receive some funds and there's specific uses for that, but that's some of the direct distribution that we have. And then, I mean, that's kind of the big grant programs. Like I said, we actually administer over 20 different grant programs. There's a wide range of those. CSBG, so Community Service Block Grants, which is some other federal funding that gets distributed to local governments. Peace Officer Mental Health, I was talking with the chief about that just a little bit ago. That's another program. There's some other little programs that are out there, one-offs, but the ones I just covered were the big ones that mostly the elected officials are usually most interested in. The other ones are programs your staff will know about and try to pursue here and there where they can with that. Any questions on funding?
I have one about the
Sure.
technical assistance.
Mhm.
Does that have anything to do with, or are there resources through that for the town's infrastructure? So there was a big challenge with the phones and the computers and all of that. Is there any relation to any technical assistance that can help a town sort of set up new systems that would be financially beneficial?
Not necessarily to
Okay.
that specific level. Now, there may be, depending on the program or what the end goal is, what the town is
Mhm.
trying to do, the opportunity to get some grant funding from us to hire a consultant to help you with that.
Mhm.
We have a tool through the Energy Impact Program called Administrative Planning Grants that we utilize for some of that preliminary level stuff though. But going back to Energy Impact, more often than not, you'll start with an admin planning grant to help with a conceptual idea of something that you're trying to do. And it could be infrastructure related. Water and wastewater are the primary ones, but stormwater, broadband has been another big one, communications of some type. And then you move from admin planning grant to maybe a tier one, so that's that up to $200,000 to actually create construction design or, have professional architectural engineering design or whatever on a system, and then you would move to a tier 2 application to actually build whatever it is that you're trying to do.
Thank you.
The technical assistance we do more to, like I said, best government practices before. is really helping you all, whether it's you as the elected officials, appointed people like your planning commission, or your staff. And there's a wide range that we do with that. Once again, this elected official one-on-one training is some of the technical assistance we provide. And then I'll talk a little bit here more as some of where we could take some of the specific areas where we could take deeper dives into. An example I would say is strategic planning. Like if we were doing strategic planning, you could bring me in, and here's the best thing, anything DOLA does, it's free of charge. You don't have to pay a dime for it because it's already being paid by the state taxpayers for it. But it's a matter of getting on the schedule with me, and I can work with you to develop a strategic plan, or work with the community to develop their capital improvement plan, or those type of things that we do. So we hit on a number of different things on there. I will caution though, it says legal and ethical issues. In fact, on my way here, I was on the phone with another community dealing with a legal and ethical issue. I will always default to your town attorney. I'm not an attorney. I like to play one on TV. I drove my town attorney nuts with that over the years. When I was a city manager, I know a little bit of, but I am not somebody to give legal advice, so I'm always going to refer to that. But I can give you a basis of saying, hey, yeah, you're going to want to talk to your attorney, and here's the reasons why. And here are some of the questions you should be asking your attorney, too. And then some of the ethical issues. We always get into some ethical issues, and I'll touch on base a little bit more on that here in a little bit. Elected official training, though, roles and responsibilities that we're doing tonight, effective decision-making, going to hit on that, working together as a board, we're going to head on that. Just some of the best management practices, running effective meeting, all these are topics we're going to touch on tonight. But in addition to that, next one, as I said, visioning and strategic planning, which I know you guys have already been doing and working on a lot. Budget training, we do a lot of budget training that more often than not has to do with staff and helping staff to understand it. But once again, if you was just, hey, especially as newly elected officials, government budgeting is not the same as the private industry. And I was guilty of this because I came from the private industry before I got into public industry, and I've heard this all the time. I'm a business owner. I know how to do budgets. I'm going to show the town how to do a budget. And they have no idea about the rules and regulations that apply to government agencies when it comes to budgeting. So what are those things are? Once again, I'm always going to say, I've got my knowledge and expertise and for doing it for a lot of years, but I'm always going to default to your professional staff that you have. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the importance of you guys have excellent professional staff. They are critical to helping you do your job well. And we'll talk on that relationship here. And then capital planning and budget. So quick exercise, take a few minute break. Anybody needs the restroom or whatever, please by all means. But just want you to think about these three questions today. And for the elected officials, I'm going to actually ask you to write these down right now. I'm not going to make you share them out or anything like that. I'm going to email you all later, not tonight, but either tomorrow or the next day. And I'm going to ask you, if you would, send me your answers to this. Because it just helps me to understand what I'm doing in my training and what you're trying to think about. And I'll combine that information into a very general response and then share that with Katie to help her understand what you guys are thinking too with that. So it is confidential. It's not going to be open with that, but I would love to hear your feedback on that. So when we take a couple minute break, we can do that.
For a whole 5 minutes. I keep on having to turn mic 2 all the way down to get it to stop, and then I can slowly bring it back up, and then it backs up again. I gotta turn it back down. And I'm like, ugh, if mic 2 is all the way down, is it like which mic is mic 2? You know?
Am I going too fast?
Who's not recording? You know?
He can't keep up.
Couldn't
He's
tell
from
you for
McNair,
sure.
so we know why.
Because we only have a mic 1 and a mic 2 as well.
I just wish there was
There's
more.
definitely more mics.
I'll work on trying to do that. I'll try to get more pictures.
Oh, I couldn't tell you.
All depends.
I bet it's
Mumbo
mic
jumbo.
row 1 and row 2.
Death by PowerPoint.
Couldn't tell you.
I just put on the picture.
for our first round of the strategic plan, weren't you?
Why do you seem so familiar?
I don't know. Katie.
I'm good, how are you?
Katie and I go way back. We've actually known each other
You're like, hey, I paperwork for like everybody. I'm like,
well over 10 years. But no, yeah, was not involved in that. You guys were on your own? Like I said, I live in Uray. I come in the region once in a while. I mean, Bayfield just, more of my interactions with Bayfield have been on the phone than or on the computer.
I was thinking the other day, it was really funny because the other day I was like, who's that pretty girl?
See, I used to try to get people, you remember as a
It's long, and the color looks really pretty on you. I don't know, is it more your makeup or? Yeah.
Yeah, it's mostly my natural, just the highlights.
Just a little high. It's good. We just got back from vacation, so I'm. Where'd you go? We went to the football.
I don't wanna be on the
Oh, just the two of you or just the two of us? Him and I. Yeah. And the cool thing about it is like, I'm connected too much. So much. And on those things, I didn't buy the package, so, and I'm not gonna confirm it. It's all it's fine, but it is completely off. Yay! I got to.
Thank you.
It was rude. I know, can you believe that water? I'm just like, is this your trip? Yeah. I was just telling her, do you ever see those places on TV or something like that, and you're like, I don't believe that's real. Like, it's not real. And then you go there and you're like, it's real. It's really that pretty. It's really that color.
Yeah, I've only felt like that from you.
Yeah.
That it was just.
Might have to go there. It's chilly.
Huh? It's chilly. Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes it's really hot.
Make time.
Sometimes it's really chilly. Sometimes it makes you sneeze.
Now we'll start to get into the meats.
Yeah, neat stuff.
Brenda's over here laughing at me.
I'm half tempted to just unplug it.
It's so weird that it just does it so randomly.
Yeah,
There's no rhyme.
no reason.
Technology.
Yeah.
That'll be lunch.
Yep. I still have my little trusty plaque.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, I kept it.
We can have Dustin move the slides if you want.
Yeah, move me ahead too, please, Dustin. Right. One more. All right, we'll get started into this. So now we're going to talk into roles and responsibilities, and I said before, we're going to talk about individually, you all as elected officials, you collectively as the board, and then the different groups that you work with, whether it's planning commission and other advisory boards you have, your staff, citizens, and applicants, land use applicants. So grounding authority, the way the state constitution is set up, as I mentioned before, it all comes down to local control. The idea is you are responsible for running your community. You're establishing the rules and regulations that your community works with under. Now, obviously, some of that is geared by statute, but a lot of it is also geared by what you all collectively feel you need to do for your community. So when we all talk about local governments, what's the responsibility? When I started 20 years, it was very simple. 20 years ago, it was very simple: health, safety, welfare. We've all heard that, right? We learned that in civics class at some point in the back day: health, safety, welfare. So here's the health and safety. Obviously, some of these pieces, some of these things you guys do directly, but as a municipality, but some of them as at the county level. But these are, the basis behind what local governments do, providing those services or providing critical things for a community that aren't necessarily supported by the private industry in one form or fashion. So what are those roles and responsibilities? So let's start with, next slide, and elected officials. Next one more. Thank you. Your job, set policy. You're creating the vision. I tell elected officials all the time, you get to operate at that 30,000 foot level. You guys are the dreamers. You're the visionaries. You're the ones saying, where is our community today and where would we like it to go? And you can come up with anything that's out there. What is the thing that you guys want to do? You don't necessarily need to get bogged down into the lower levels, into the weeds or anything, say, well, how do we do that? That's what your staff is for. You guys are setting that vision, though, and you're setting that priority. And your community, your citizens, and your staff depend on you to give that clear vision of where you're supposed to be going. Fiduciary responsibility. To me, this is my opinion, that's one of the most important responsibilities you have, because you're overseeing taxpayer dollars, right? As a taxpayer, I like my money and the way I control it and spend it, and I'm hesitant to give it to somebody else about it. Now, I'm putting my faith in all of you that you're going to do a good job with my dollars and maximize the services that you're trying to provide to me with that. That's your responsibility, and you have a lot of responsibility that comes to that. When we talk about a little bit later on about public official liability, and when we talk about transparency and openness and conflicts of interest and all that, in the end, it all comes down to money, because you're overseeing taxpayers' dollars and assets, the assets that belong to them. And we all get into it, and we all say the right things, right? Well, of course we understand that this isn't our building, it's the public's building. Yeah, we say that. But when you get in this work for a while, you start doing things, sometimes that starts to drift a little bit, and your vision on that drifts a little bit. You've always got to come back to being able to keep that in mind of what those responsibilities are, including protecting the public's interest. It isn't about what you all individually feel anymore. Absolutely, you're supposed to bring your individual knowledge, experience, opinion to the table and part of the discussion, but in the end, your actions are not for you as individuals. Your actions are based on you as a board, and your board's actions are supposed to be in the public's interest. Now, that's a very difficult thing to pin down and say, what is the public's interest? And I'm willing to bet we could have 3 or 4 different opinions on, we could pick a random subject and come up with it and have a discussion on that right now. But that's part of this process that we do, and what our role is, the structures that we've created for our local governments, for you to have those discussions. But in the end, when you take that action, and I'll get into that more here, how important that is, that you're acting in the public's interest. Your job, hire staff and appoint boards that will further the mission. I'll talk about this a little bit more, but your town manager is your employee. All these other people, they're not necessarily your employee. They all report to the town manager. So think of it as a board of directors for a company, and then you have the chief executive or the chief operator and the president of the company. You have those same type of roles, right? You all judge the performance of the community and make sure it's going the direction you want it to go by tasking Katie to carry out that work with her. She then manages the staff to do all that. And we'll talk once more about this a little bit. But your staff is there and brings resources collectively to all of you to help you make the decisions that you need to be making. Likewise, there's a number of different boards that you'll appoint. Obviously, Planning Commission is a critical one with that, but you can have a wide range of other advisory boards that are there to help you do this, because you've got to become experts on a wide range of things all at once, and it's not easy to do, because I'm willing to bet none of you have this as your full-time job, right? You all have day jobs. You all have lives outside of this. But you're also not just, okay, I'm going to come to a board meeting once a month for an hour or twice a month for an hour and that's it, and call it good as a town trustee. No, there's a lot of work that goes into it, a lot of knowledge you got to get, and you're going to depend on a lot of different people to help you, give you the information you need, because in the end, it's not Katie's decision, it's not your staff's decision, it's yours. The citizens of this community chose you all to be their leaders. They expect you to make the decision. So guess what? That's why you get paid the big bucks, right? You have to make those decisions. Providing that direction, two-way communication, support to staff, emergency readiness. This is one of those areas that, you know, once again, local governments didn't really touch base on. Just even 20 years ago, we were only just starting to get into it. Nowadays, what the role of a community and the leadership in regards to response to an emergency of any kind, whether it be a wildland fire, natural disaster, flood, you know, storms, pandemics, or human-caused crisis of any kind. Some of the most powerful sessions I've ever sat in at conferences I've gone to when it's talking about emergency response and readiness were more related to the human action versus natural disaster type of things. Next slide. So as your roles as a member of board, it's important that these list. You don't do things for yourself, right? Now, we all have this concept that we grew up watching TV and in the movies of the mayor, he can do whatever he wants. And, you know, as a, you know, go back to the old stories of, you know, some of these big cities in New York or Chicago and the trustees and the roles and the power that they had and all this authority. That's all bullshit, right? It's all fake on TV. You don't have a lot of those things. You only have the authority of one vote as a part of a team. And I'll talk more into that here, but you need to keep that in mind, and you gotta always be looking at your actions and what it looks like. Hate to tell you this, but you do this job 24/7, whether you like it or not. You can't say, oh, I'm gonna go comment on this, but I'm not commenting as a board of trustee member, because it doesn't matter what you say, it's gonna be the perception of the public that's out there, and they will assign your title to you whether you like it or not. And then you gotta watch the press, all right? And I'm not saying watch the press because don't trust them type of thing. Over there on the right, those are actual headlines, and I was actually talking with my community here recently, or my colleagues recently. I need to update this slide because just in my community right now, and then in another community, another region's community, new headlines are coming up. I just was reading an article of a Denver area town council where they hired a special prosecutor to investigate members of the board who had violated the town's home rule charter in regards to open meetings and procedural actions. And then the town board, the special prosecutor was reporting that they found evidence of criminal activity by 4 of the members. So 4 of the 9, this town board had 9 members. So the other 5 voted the prosecutor to move forward with criminal actions. Now, once again, I go back to that thing, I'm not an attorney, but I know a little bit. There are no criminal actions necessary unless you're doing something that's wrong. And if that's the case, it's gonna go to law enforcement and they're gonna handle some things like that, you know, truly criminal. But there's a lot of, once again, seeing that on the headline, what are all the citizens of that community thinking about their town board? Are they sitting there thinking, oh, they're working out for my best interest? They're trying to solve some of the problems we have in our community, whether it's affordable housing, homelessness, you know, transportation issues, you know, we want better rec programs. Are they spending their time doing that? No, they're fighting over procedural issues and hiring special investigators and using their tax dollars to hire special prosecutors to investigate their town boards. Is that an effective community? And you'll hear me say this time and again. You need to keep your community moving forward. If you become stagnant, that's when you're hurting your community. And as much as communities work together, and I will talk about regional collaboration a little bit more here and how important that is, in the end though, you're still competing against everybody else. If you want a healthy economy, what are you doing to recruit businesses into your community? If you want to provide housing for your businesses so they have employees, who are you competing against to build that in? And I'm just using those as examples. I'm not saying you directly as the town, that those are your issues. Those are the conversations every community is having right now. And so you've got to be working together, and you don't want to waste your time on wrong, crazy headlines. something I always did as a manager, and I still to this day, is always the litmus test of what would this look like on the headlines of the newspaper. Ask yourself that sometimes. What will this look like? I have a community in my region that for years, even before DOLA, was notorious of total dysfunction and infighting and backstabbing and you name it, just things that would happen outside of the town hall, personal attacks on social media, everything like this. And it grew and grew and grew, and I went to my very first meeting that I went to there when I joined DOLA, and there was gonna be a fist fight, and I'm like, oh my God, these stories are true about this town, and I watched this town go, and it got so bad, and all of a sudden, at one point, something had happened in the town, and they made it to national news, right? And all the national news started picking up on it and talking on everything that's going on, and it was funny because I had been working with these elected officials quite a bit, and I saw this click, like this light just go on. And all of a sudden they just like, wait a minute, this has gone too far. We're hurting our community. I actually at one point told them, you're killing your community and quit wasting my time. I tried to get fired and they actually made me come back and work with them more. I was like, oh, are you not listening to me? But it then clicked. I'll tell you what, that community, and I kept telling the town board, I go, there's all this fighting that's even happening with your citizens, but it all starts with you guys. It all starts because everybody's seeing how you interact and how you treat each other and how you're handling these same topics that everybody else is discussing at the coffee shop or at the bar or at the post office, right? It starts with you. And when that finally it hit that key point, all of a sudden they kind of turned it around. They started working together. And I'll tell you what, that community is like hitting on all cylinders. They're just kicking butt. And they're doing some things, and they still don't. It's not perfect. They've got some challenges they're still dealing out there. But it all started with the town board saying, we've got to come together and we got to figure out how to do it. Doesn't mean we all have to agree, doesn't mean we all have to get along, but we want to do it. But it all started with headlines like this and made it to national news and how embarrassing it was for that community. Next slide. So, things to consider, all of these. You're expected to do this. Whether you would have put this on your resume or put this as part of your campaign slogan when you ran for office, all your citizens are expecting you to do all these things and to be experts at all of them and to never, ever make a single mistake. Good luck, right? Because we know how difficult this is. It's not black and white like it's written up there. We understand. We're all human. You start down one road and you start to realize, wait a minute, we're going the wrong way on this. We've got to turn this around. But man, we're going to take some heat for turn around. Yeah, those things are going to happen. That's part of serving. That's part of being there for your community. But when you're trying to live to these things as much as you can, that's when you can really help your community, what you're trying to do. All right, town manager. What's the role of the town manager? Against popular perception by a number of elected officials, or more so by citizens, the town manager really doesn't have any authority. The only authority a town manager has is the authority that's been granted to them by their elected officials, usually in the city code. It's very limited, very specific. Beyond that, the decisions come to you. And a professional town manager, which you guys do have, is going to bring those things to you, and they know what they need to bring to you. And your job is to oversee and listen to what those things are. Now, it doesn't mean you're going to always like what they're going to have to say, or you're going to always agree with what they say. And I'll be truthful. Town managers, once again, are human and they make mistakes. We're not perfect either. Those things happen out there, but it's how you work collectively together for the betterment of your community that is the critical thing. And it starts with communication. And you're going to see communication here a lot on this, and I'm going to bring this up as an example. On top of being the town manager in Luray for 13 years and worked for DOLA for 7 years, I'm also the battalion chief in our fire department. For 18 years now, and I've also worked in county extrication. I've worked in emergency management. Whenever there's an incident of any kind, whether it's a traffic accident or a house fire or a wildland fire, you deal with the incident. You do afterwards. You do a debriefing or a hot wash. A lot of times it's referred to. You have a quick briefing. Like after a call, we get back to the fire station and you do a debriefing. You say, okay, what went well? Name off the 3, 4, 5 things that went well. What are the 3 things that were challenges? Every single time, I guarantee you, every single time, communication is one of the challenges. Communication is always, as much as we wanted to do it, as much as my 30-year marriage, I taught and tried to have to work on communication every single day of my life. And that's how we got it. You always have to be aware of it. It does the same thing with your town manager. The importance of working and communicating with your town manager, how you have to do that. And here's the things that they do. They have specific responsibilities to carry out and to you all. And here's what you can do on that. Most important though is that last line. As town managers, we are bound by the action of the town board. Whether we agree with it or not does not matter. We will happily share our opinion. We should be making a recommendation to you based on our professional expertise and knowledge and experience and history of the community and all those other things and information we got from staff, all those other things. But in the end, you all make a decision, and our job is to carry out that decision, whether we agree with it. An example I could give, when I was a town manager years ago, my city council was taking consideration of rezoning of a piece of property. It had gone through planning commission. Planning commission had recommended to reject it, gave very specific reasons why. We as staff, when it came to council, presented all the information, gave all the reasons why it should be rejected. The city council heard from the applicant though, and the applicant gave their reason why they wanted it done, and the city council approved that rezoning. And it was gonna create quite a nightmare for us in a lot of areas, what they did and why. But they, that night, hit on a heartstring or whatever, went the direction of the applicant. City council meeting was done last night. I was always the last guy to, turn out all the lights, go in my office, kind of clean up things, turning everything off. And I come walking out, and one of my council members just standing there in the corner. I'm like, hey, Gary, what's up? And he's like, we really screwed up today, didn't we? You want my personal opinion, or do you want my professional opinion? I'm like, no, you didn't screw up. You did what you thought was right, Gary. That's all. And he actually started to cry, which was, if you knew Gary, he wore his emotions on his sleeve. Great guy. But he's like, I feel like we offended you. We didn't listen to you. And I'm like, no, you didn't offend me. Yeah, it's going to create some issues that we're going to have to deal with as staff down the line, but we're not the decision makers. You all are. You're the elected officials. You made the decision. Tomorrow morning when I go into my staff meeting and I meet with my department heads, we're going to develop our strategy to carry out that mission. And we're going to do it. And we're going to do it to the best of our ability. That is our job. That is the manager's job, to work with staff to carry out your direction. So keep that in mind. You guys have got to remember that. Sometimes you have to remind your citizens that. That's the manager's role with all of you.
Can I get a little bit more detail behind the town manager recruits, hires, terminates, and supervises staff? Can you elaborate on that just a little bit? I mean, without the board's weigh-in, or give me thoughts about that.
Yeah. In the perfect world, let's say perfect, because it's not always perfect, and there are some exceptions to that. In a perfect world, we're not involved in staff related issues. And that's because when you start to service organizations, and CIRSA, your insurance provider, will be happy to come down and do a public official liability training for you. In fact, they put out this.
I don't know, they're doing training in Mancus, and we were invited. I don't have the actual date or time, so.
Yeah, they used to do their public official liability handbook. I'd always give a copy to all my elected officials. But they do training. You can get over there to Mancus to participate in it. I would highly recommend it because it's going to be the same message across the board. You can get over here in the same light. Continue to make you incredibly work with it. They're excellent at that. But they will go into a lot of this. When you get into hiring, termination, there's a lot of legal matters that are there. And quite frankly, you guys should be happily saying, we stay out of it. That's the town manager's responsibility. Now, your job is to oversee and make sure the town manager is doing that properly. If you don't like what they're doing, then you address it with the town manager. But we have the town manager.
So how do we address what's the procedure for addressing the town manager on those situations? Go into executive session?
You have to be careful with that, because if you're talking about a specific employee, that employee is notified, has to be notified of that, and they can request that discussion take place out of executive session. So you have to be very careful with that.
Are you still talking about the town manager, or are you talking
About Tom, you're talking about an employee, right? Like
No,
if the
he's
town
got-
manager's got an
correct.
employee, because this is what'll happen, right? Town employees getting disciplined for some reason or other, they don't like it, right? And they're mad at their supervisor, and they come run into one of you guys. Because they happen to know you, you're next door neighbor, or,
Well, we
their
have an
kids
employee
playing sports with
liaison.
your kids or something, what?
We have an employee liaison on the board for that.
Yeah, I mean, you can have that, but you want to be very, very careful on that. Now, I said in a perfect world, you don't touch any of those things. You say, we have a system, you should have part of your employee handbook, your employee rules and regulations that clearly outlines how you handle those things. That's in a perfect situation. Not every community is like that. They do have variances and knowledge of that. You have to just be very careful with it. Take the advice of your town attorney, because they're going to advise you on a lot of that. Because here's the thing that you got to keep in mind, and it's not just in public sector. This is even in the private sector. There are laws, rules, and regulations that protect employees. And employers and employees, and often, partially my opinion, it is set up in a way that it not unfairly, it leans heavily towards the employee. The employee is always given more protections and more rights than an employer will ever have, okay? It's just the way the system works. And there's rules and regulations, you have to be very careful about that. And if you step out of line on any of those, you open yourself up to a lot of legal issues that can come into it. So once again, when you can, you want to push that responsibility to your town manager and assume, well, not assume, you're going to have conversations with your town manager to make sure that the process is going properly. Through HR rules and regulations, but there's a lot of things out there, and it gets very difficult. Once again, I had an example. I had an employee that I had to terminate at one time. They chose to appeal it. At the time, our rules and regulations were they could appeal it to the city council. And I did. The city council had to keep their distance because it became a quasi-judicial type matter then. So they were trying to keep ex parte. Well, of course, this individual and their family were not just going to say, oh, we'll wait till the hearing to talk to you. And here's all these letters going in the newspaper and all this other things that were out there happening, right? And we couldn't say anything. I mean, I could not say anything. The council couldn't say anything. This employee's daughter wrote a letter and just inaccuracies, misinformation of all type. But because of state laws and the protections of an employee, we couldn't say anything. And it gets very frustrating and difficult because then you got citizens that are always coming up to you saying, what's going on? What kind of things are you doing out there? What the hell? All this other stuff. And you have to say, you've got to trust in the process. You've got to trust in the process. And then trust in the people that are involved in that process. And it will work its way out. Sometimes the way you want it, sometimes not necessarily the way you want it, but it will work its way out. But the more you guys start to dip your toe into that water, the more you potentially open yourselves to liability issues. Now, CIRSA will tell you, you have certain parameters that you can and cannot work within, and as long as you stay within those parameters, you're protected. They will represent you. They will hire a big law firm to come in and protect the town and work with all of you on it. But if you step over that line, CIRSA will cut and run in a second, and then you're personally liable for issues. So you got to be very careful and watch how you handle some of those things.
Well, more specifically, do the trustees hire the town manager?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All
That's,
right.
I can't say specific to the town of Bayfield, right?
Right.
In general, best practices,
Okay.
yes, the town of trustees. And I work with communities all the time when they have turnover in a town manager,
Yeah.
right? And I come in and I can do everything from, work with you to develop and your process of hiring them to, or a lot of communities will hire a consultant to hire, to go out and find a new town manager. And yes, ultimately it is your decision. I tell town trustee members, hiring a town manager is one of the most important jobs you'll ever do because you're hiring the person to carry out your directions, right? Now, new election, right? Come in, you're dealing with somebody different. That doesn't change. You rely on, you're dealing with professionals. I mean, not all town managers are professionals, but most town managers have a degree in public administration most often. They have masters in public administration. They have years of experience with it. They have knowledge. And going back to where I was saying before is most town managers do not have their own personal agenda that they're trying to work. They're just trying to do the job. They're trying to serve their employees. They're trying to serve the citizens of the community. They're trying to serve you. I will say it on one of the slides here. Their job is to make you look good and give you all the information you need to make the best decisions for your citizens in the public's interest, right? They are very professional in doing that. Rely on that. Trust in that. Get to know them. Learn those things that they have for them. I had a couple of different years where I had elections that people would come on board to get elected and they were like, Patrick, your days are numbered type of thing, right? Well, I didn't survive 13 years necessarily on that because once they got to know what we do and we established the working relationship and they understood what my job was, I wasn't taking a side on the election. That isn't my job. In fact, as an ICMA member, the International City and County Management Association, we have a code of ethics that we follow. We specifically cannot get involved in local politics. Even myself in DOLA right now, I watch all these elections all the time. I just watch them because I have to work with whoever gets elected. I'm not here to pick a side on one side or another. My job is to help you do your job properly. Every town manager is taking that approach. Some of us are not as good as others at it. You know, that's the way it is. You can't judge it on somebody got fired from one community and hired in another because that's just the nature. I always look at it as it's similar to being a coach in the NHL. You can win the Stanley Cup one year and the next year you can be gone, right? What's the average lifespan of a town manager? Something like 4, 5, 6 years, something like that.
4 years.
Statewide, I mean, they're either moving on to other communities or their families moved on or something like that, or they get terminated, but then they get hired and be successful in another community. A certain community in our town, in 20 years, they've had 13 town managers in 20 years. Most of those 13 went on to become very successful town managers in other communities. A lot of it came back to the dysfunction of the board that was happening in the community. Yes, it is the community I was talking about earlier that had all the dysfunction. Now they've got an outstanding town manager and they're just hitting on every cylinder with them. So, yeah, I mean, that's a long explanation to your question, but you want to really watch when you get into personnel issues. You want to rely on you have a structure in your organization and you have the proper people in place to manage that for you.
I have one more question.
Sure.
Can you, you mentioned the quasi-judicial sit. Can you go into more detail with that?
Yep, I got a whole bunch of slides on that. We're going to do that here in the near future on that one. I definitely will. So this is just a page on this one. It's taken from another source. I do want to note on there, it says under its role of the manager appoints all remaining staff. That should say hires all remaining staff. It isn't necessarily appointed. If you do have appointed positions, like you all do appoint the city attorney or the town attorney, right? You appoint the municipal judge. Those are other positions that report directly to you. That is a relationship that I don't really highlight in this, but it's important to know and understand is the town attorney does not report to the town manager. The town attorney works on behalf of the town and reports to the board. So the town attorney doesn't even represent any of you individually. They represent you collectively. That's another one of those critical decisions you'll make. Not as critical as the town manager, in my opinion. The town attorney will probably disagree with me on that, but it's a very important position too that you appoint. And then the municipal judge is your other employee. At our level, you know, this size of a community, municipal judge is kind of a smaller responsibility versus, you know, some of the bigger communities that have multiple municipal judges. That gets a little bit different, but so that's the appointments. That's the difference, though. That should say hiring of all staff out there. But this sheet, and it's on your document there, and you'll get an electronic version of this presentation too, that you can look at that a little bit more in the future. So next slide, I'm going to talk and shift gears to Planning Commission and what role they play. So I'll talk about advisory committees as a whole here in a moment, but planning commission is a little bit different. Planning commission actually has some statutory responsibilities and has some authority that your other advisory committees do not have. Usually has to deal with conditional use permits and variances that they have some authority in relationship to that. But planning commission, and glad to hear in a natural process, or planning commission members becoming board trustees. That's a common thing in a lot of communities. They're your experts, though, to go into the weeds on land use issues. And land use becomes very delicate because most of the time you're dealing with public facilities, right? Public rights of way, public parks, public buildings. When you're talking about land use, you're dealing with private property and private property rights and what people have with that. And it gets a little bit more formal. It actually gets a lot more formal. This starts to get into more of the quasi-judicial stuff that we'll talk more about later. It gets very detailed on the rules and regulations that you guys have created and have adopted in your land use code. Once again, it relies on professional staff to help you and your planning commission with a lot of these things. And I mean, professional staff, this isn't just, you know, somebody who was running a bakery and now they become a planner. It's a professional career with a professional education track that they follow. You know, rely on that knowledge and expertise. They're there to help, once again, and treat the planning commission very similar to how the town manager treats you all, is help advise, guide, provide information for the planning commission to make their decisions. Planning commission is then making recommendations that come to you. Listen to it. Doesn't mean you have to agree with it all the time. And it doesn't mean that they're always going to be right. But rely that they, and trust that they've done that extra work for you, and then they bring this information to you when it comes to you. So when they're approving a plat and it's coming to you, or they're approving a variance on a piece of property, you understand what the basis with the and why. And I'll go into, once again, that process a little bit more. But planning commission plays a very important role in the overall operation of a community, a member of the team, and a resource for all of you as the town board members. Other advisory boards and commissions, you can have a wide range of things. Very common to have a Parks and Rec advisory committee, Economic Development advisory committee. In URA, we had a beautification committee. You know, you have a wide range of things. You can hire these community, or you can appoint these commissions or these boards to do once again, very specific tasks or do research on you. Sometimes they can be very temporary. You know, it's not uncommon that a community would hire or appoint an affordable housing advisory committee that eventually morphs into maybe a housing authority or something along those lines. But it starts with just that, hey, we need a group of people, a group of citizens, and you take the opportunity to appoint a wide range of members bringing different perspectives that you think will be important to this committee, to that board or that commission, ask them with a specific task to do, and then have them come back to you. An example, it's funny because I say these things and I always say, here's examples when I was a town manager. Katie is formerly in URA too, knows a lot of the players and the people that I'm talking about with this one. We had an economic development committee, and in my 13 years, they were twice tasked with examining and making a recommendation of whether the city of URA should implement a business license. We did not have a business license for a number of years. Twice in those 13 years, the advisory committee did all this deep research on it. They polled other communities, they understood what the fee amounts were that they were charging, what they were using those fees for, what type of services were coming back to the community for those fees and those business licenses. Twice they recommended that the city should implement business licenses, and twice the city council rejected that recommendation and chose not to have it. Yeah, there could be a little bit of hostility, you know, that some of those committee members were like, you put us through all that work and we did all this research and then you didn't decide to do what we were recommending, you know. But in the end, the advisory committees have no authority at all. They work at your behalf. Once again, they're a body that you create to help do a deeper dive on a particular subject, to bring recommendations back to you or bring options back to you for you then to make a decision for the community. And sometimes town advisory committee members have a hard time with that. Once again, I said Ray had a beautification committee. My mother-in-law started that committee, was a part of it. Katie got to deal with my mother-in-law. I used to go round and round with my mother-in-law because she would want to enter into a contract or whatever. I'm like, you can't do that. You have no authority. That's just, we can't. No, you can't. I would go around all the time, mates for some difficult family dinners sometimes. And my mother-in-law had a strong personality. Still does. I shouldn't say had. Still does. So staff, once again, your professional staff, you have a wide range of expertise in so many different fields that are here. Their job is to carry out the day-to-day. I mean, they take care of the day-to-day for you. You don't need to be involved in the day-to-day because of the staff that you have. And they're all sitting right here. And it's great that they're here and participating in this, because they should be hearing me say this to all of you, and hopefully you're all listening to it. Doesn't mean you're always going to agree with them. Doesn't mean that they're going to be perfect. Doesn't mean that communities don't have challenges where somebody isn't good in a job. There's a process for that, but start from the positive. Start from relying on these people bring years of experience, whether it's private sector or public sector, education, career advancement. You know, there's a whole wide range of things that they bring to the table for you all. Rely on that. They're, as I said before, they're there to make you look good. They're there to help you make decisions and give you the information you need. And if you're not getting the information you need from them, communicate that. Communicate through the process to your town manager and say, hey, we would really like to have more of an analysis about this street and why we're doing this infrastructure project, and what did we consider other things like these things? I mean, you know, these different options. You know, have those conversations, rely on them to bring that information to you. They are here to help you from that side. Yes, they take care of the day-to-day, but they're also there to help you. Next slide. Citizens. Don't ever discount the role citizens play. They won't let you forget the role that they play. You know, they should participate fully. Do they? No. Once again, when I was a town manager, we knew we were doing things well when nobody showed up to council meetings. Right? We had one or two that came to every council meeting because that was their entertainment. All right, but when they didn't show up or nobody was there, we knew everybody must be happy. When a crowd of 30 people came into the room, we knew, uh-oh, something's up. Now, hopefully, most of the time, I would know what's going on with that, but not always with that. They're there, citizens, to give you their opinions, and you should be listening to them, and I'll go into this a little bit more. It's important to listen to everything that they say. They bring different perspectives to you, but they don't always do it politely. Years ago, I took a leadership training, and one of the sayings I learned in that has stuck with me all these years. Focus on the situation, not the individual. Right? You got to listen to the emotions that they, and cut through the emotions and listen to the content that they're having. Years ago, Ray has a street that we closed down in the wintertime as a sled hill. There was a resident on that street who came to a council meeting and just laid into city council and staff about this sled hill. They're just like, you guys are horrible. There's people in all hours of the night that are you know, out there sledding. There's trash everywhere. People are peeing behind the tree in my yard. You know, all these things, right, just went off. Cars will still try and drive up the road even though it's been closed for sledding, all this. And he was shaking and teary-eyed because he was so upset and passionate, right? He just laid into us. Very next day, we're in our staff meeting. You know, first start of the staff meeting, we, you know, debrief from the council meeting the night before, and my staff was just really upset about how dare Gene come in and talk to us that way, and how dare he act like this. And I'm like, wait a minute. Listen to what he's saying. Cut through the emotion and listen to what he was saying. He's right. We do nothing to take care of this asset. We're allowing all these things to happen. And so what we did over the next few weeks is we put up nice signage that said the road is closed. This is the Ray Sled Hill. Here's some rules. Please be courteous to the neighbors around here. Please park in the designated parking areas. Please use the trash receptacles that we set up for you. Please don't use the trees as a bathroom. Here, we got a temporary toilet for you. We did all these things with it. He came back a few weeks later, and lo and behold, a rare thing, he came and thanked us for listening to him and solving the problem with it. It was very easy to not listen to what he was saying and shut down because of the emotion that was involved, but listening, cutting through it, because they're not always going to be polite. Now, we've all seen a shift in society. It used to not be personal. Now it gets personal a lot. You got to try and still weather the storm on that. I still have some very raw scars from my time because people do get personal and they're not polite. That's just the fact of the, back to where I said before, that's why you guys get paid the big bucks, right? So, and then citizens, ask questions and offer input and solutions. They sometimes will offer solutions. You more have to drag it out to them. They will be happy to tell you what you're doing wrong, but then ask them, so what do you think we should be doing different? What suggestion? Here's the problem we're trying to address. And you don't like this solution we came up with. What other solutions do you have? What else would you recommend we do? Yeah, we did look at that, and here's the reasons why we didn't pursue that. Or, you know what? Maybe they do come up with an idea. You're like, you know, we talked about it, but we didn't really explore that more. Maybe we do need to have a little bit more of a conversation on that. You know, they can bring some good solutions to you. They bring a perspective that we all lose sometimes because we're working here, right? And we lose that perspective. So listen to what they're saying even when they're not very pleasant about it. Lastly, applicants, land use applicants, they play an important role too. It's important to have clear rules and processes for them to follow. That avoids them from trying to take advantage of the community in any way or take advantage of you all or your staff in some way, but it also lets them know and understand what the process is, because obviously land use applicants are investing a lot of money to do something. And you want to be respectful and pay attention to that and what that looks like. By giving them a fair and predictable process, it gives them more confidence to invest in a process that you want to do. We're in a crazy time. There's a lot of money that's flying out there. There's a lot of people trying to do a lot of things. A lot of applicants can be very good partners with you to accomplish bigger goals for your community. But be attention to them, listen to what they're saying. They can also a lot of times bring to you unnecessary roadblocks. I mean, every community has this in your code. If you're not regularly evaluating and updating your code, you'll have things that were put in by a town board 10 or 15 years ago that make no sense at all today. And in some ways they make roadblocks. I mean, that's been the whole initiative from the state and the governors when it comes to affordable housing, is removing roadblocks to prevent the development of affordable housing. Well, a lot of those roadblocks that they talked about, I remember when I first started as a town manager, we were implementing and purposely putting into our code, because at the time we weren't thinking about affordable housing. We were thinking about controlling growth and controlling the type of building that was occurring, and what about parking spaces, and what about park space, and all these other things, right? And now you're seeing a shift that some of those things are now considered barriers, and how do you remove those? Times change, right? Things come and go. It's important to listen to your applicants, because they can give you some feedback on that, as saying, hey, I'd really like to help the town and build this really cool place that we would all benefit from, but you got so many rules and regulations in the way, it makes it very difficult for me to do, or it doesn't make it cost effective for me to do. Understand that. Doesn't mean you have to remove those rules, but listen to the feedback that they can give you. All right, next slide. Quick break. Everybody doing all right? Questions? Okay. Relationship building, working together. Next slide. Strong elected official staff partnership helps to be a successful team. Now, we all have roles on that team, and I know sometimes you're like, it doesn't mean I want to be teammates with any of these people. It doesn't mean you have to get along. It doesn't mean that you have to agree on everything. It definitely doesn't mean that. But in the end, you all will be judged by your citizens on the performance of the body, how you guys collectively work together. And it's not just the 7 of you. It is you with your appointed advisory boards and commissions, planning commission. It's you and your staff, and how you work together to serve your community. Next slide. Some obstacles that are out there. That first one, what I was just talking about. Not everybody necessarily sees themselves as a team. Once again, none of you individually have the authority to do something on your own. The only way you have that authority is if it is granted to you by the board as a body. And that does happen. Even for the most part, not every community, it's slightly different. Even the mayor doesn't have any higher authority than the rest of you. They're the presiding officer over meetings, and then they're the ones that get to, give the keys to the city to the big, the celebration or the face of things when it comes to some of those type of pieces. But in the end, when it comes to the actual work you do, it comes down to the vote of the body. It comes down to how you guys understand the subject at hand, clearly evaluate the options that you have to move forward, and then you make a clear decision to move forward. And what the conditions are that decision is based upon. Difficulty in moving on after a close vote or contentious issue. That can be very tough to do. When I first started in the city of Uray, I had very dynamically opposed members of my council. One was very conservative, one was very liberal. And we would get in meetings and they would bicker and go at it all the time, but they were actually had a tremendous amount of respect for each other. And yes, they would say things that you were like, wow, they're really arguing about it, but they weren't. They never made it personal. They never made an issue out of it. In the end, a lot of times our votes came down to a 4-1 with one individual on the outside, and he embraced it. He's just like, yeah, I spoke my piece. I made my point. I was heard, and now we move on. And you want to keep moving forward. I can't stress enough, you got to keep moving forward. When you become stagnant, that's when you start to hurt your community. When you start to bog down, that's where things start to, the dysfunction starts to build. The frustration from your staff starts to build because they're putting in a lot of work trying to get you to get the things done, and they need a decision so they can now move on to the next thing because they've got 5 other things that are building up back there. And if you become stagnant on it, it becomes very difficult and demoralizing for a lot of people. The citizens involved in it, or the applicants that are involved in it, like I said, the staff that's involved in it, the people who are just paying attention out there, they will start to notice, say, God, can't they just make a decision? Now, that doesn't mean you don't take the time to make a decision. Make sure you're requesting the information you need to make the decision, but make the decision. Once you have that discussion, and then once that discussion is made, move on to it. You can say, I want it noted that I oppose this, and here's my reasons why, but now the decision's made, and we gotta move forward. It's really
Excuse
important.
me, in the
Sure.
climate that we're experiencing now in our country with the radicals, or as people would describe them that way, this is a nonpartisan role. So if there's an overstep of partisan, efforts, what has been your experience, say, over the last 2 or 3 or 4 years in when you've stepped in with the town board and seeing that kind of, friction, problems?
Right.
What do you have to say about that?
I'll go back and say, yes, absolutely, it's intended to be nonpartisan, and it should be. And for the most part, I think when it comes to municipal government, elected officials are glad it's not partisan necessarily, meaning nobody wants to be labeled one or the other type of thing. But that said, there's always been people that are more conservative and people that are more liberal, and that balance is there. There's always the two sides. There's the newcomers, right? And then there's the people that have been in the community for a long time. There's the multi-generational, and then there's the business community versus the residential community. Then you have the younger parents, and then you have the retirees. You've got opposing sides, or not necessarily opposing, but just different sides of the spectrum from a different points of angle. It has become in our society a little more difficult, and I think in some cases wrongfully labels get assigned to it. I mean, I see so often that just because somebody believes in, I want to preserve the open space here. Oh, you must be a Democrat. Well, it doesn't necessarily mean they're a Democrat, right? But we're quick to assign that label, and then that creates its whole issues. I have a community that there was a race for sheriff, and one candidate was a Republican, and the other candidate was unaffiliated. And there was a big movement of don't ever vote for a Republican. And so they elected the unaffiliated, who was the town drunk. And within 2 years, he had 2 DUIs as the sheriff. He was at the sheriff's conference, and the police had to be called because he and his girlfriend got drunk and they had a domestic. And then lo and behold, there was a recall election, right? The person who was the Republican candidate was the previous undersheriff and very capable and would have been a good sheriff, but there was a movement to never assigning that label, and so they took the unaffiliated and they got what they voted for, right? It was a very eye-opening experience at the time for the community to say, whoa, wait a minute. Once again, we got to take a step back on this and how we're evaluating this, and not allowing people to do these labels. And unfortunately, you're not going to be able to control what people are going to do with that. Now, it's going to come down to you all and how you work together and how you develop your working relationships. And once again, not knowing any of you and where you sit on any of those spectrums I was talking before, I know just, statistically, you guys are going to have different perspectives on any of those spectrums that we were talking about. That's fine. That's good. That's what brings a healthy debate. An example I always do about is if I described if I asked all of us to describe my computer right here, right now, or just my desk and everything that's on it, we're all going to have a slightly different opinion. We're going to have a slightly different perspective because Katie's sitting over there. She can kind of see my screen, where you guys can't see my screen at all. So her description is going to be slightly different than mine. But once again, collectively, if we share our information, then we can create a well-rounded picture of what is on my desk right now. You guys have got to find the way to work together to do that. That's critical for you to be successful for your community. Once again, doesn't mean you're going to always agree. Doesn't mean that you can't get frustrated with things and with each other. But understand, because I can tell you this, all of you, I'm willing to bet a quarter. I never bet more than a quarter, but I'll take odds sometimes. I'll bet a quarter that all of you have one thing in common when you ran for your town board. You wanted to do what was best for your community, right? You care about your community. You want to do better. Now, you may have different opinions of what is best for the community, but you all have that commonality. Every single one of you didn't do it for the money. You didn't do it for the fame. You didn't do it for the power. You did it because you care for your community. All of you have that in common. Keep that in mind. When you're having those debates and you're getting mad at each other, just know you're each doing it because you care about your community. You're hopefully coming together to make a decision on it. It's not always going to be pretty. People are going to assign labels on you whether you like it or not. In the end, though, it doesn't matter what they assign. It comes down to how you all work together.
I have a question. And the difficulty in moving on, can that be in say you had some board members, they say yes to a thing, but you had some that said no, they didn't want it to happen, but it passed, it's yes. And then you get into the minutia of actually putting the project forth. And you have decision making that you have to do after the fact. But because they're stuck on the no of initial, is that kind of like what you mean by that moving on a little bit?
Yes.
Because I can see that causing staff issues because a decision can't be made because they're stuck on, I don't want this to happen.
Yeah.
But it's already been chosen to happen.
Absolutely, you're right, okay? And let me try to give an example of a best practice, okay? And once again, I'm not here to say this is how you have to do it, okay? I'll give you an example of a best practice. And I think about it even with being a parent. I have 2 sons, soon to be 26 and a 23-year-old son, right? There are choices they've made, especially as they've gone out into the world, that I have some say in as a parent, and I don't necessarily have some say in, but I have to work within the boundaries of what we have. My younger son was a National Merit Scholar and was given a full ride scholarship to a college that they paid everything, his tuition, his housing, his books. They even paid him $4,000 a semester to go to school. The golden ticket, right, as a parent and for education. He got to where he had 1 year left, and he's like, I'm dropping out. I don't want this. Italian heritage for me, hot-blooded a little bit. I was like, are you, what? You know, my wife was just putting my hand on my shoulder, and we had to listen, and I listened to my son, and he gave the reasons for it and all that, and I'm still like, okay. I disagree with those reasons, but I also know that my son, I respected him, and raised into a certain period, and he's gonna make these decisions, and I know the decisions I made as a kid, and my parents, some of the frustrations they looked at. So I said, okay, this is the world we have now. Now how do I guide myself, my son, within that realm to do the things that will be better for him in the future, right? So somewhat similarly, I use that analogy to say, yeah, let's say there's a topic, I'm gonna do a hypothetical topic that we wanna build a rec center. And it's a hotly contested division of, should we build the rec center, or should we push the community to create a rec district and have them build the rec center? And ultimately, the town board decides, let's build the rec center. We're gonna build the rec center. Okay, we're gonna build the rec center. And maybe I was the one who opposed the town should be doing that. As a town manager, I'm saying, make the rec district do it. We got enough on our plate, make the rec district. But its decision is made. Now it's not, okay, now there's gonna be all these other things that are gonna come before. We have to hire a contractor, and we have to approve that contract and all those other things. We have to approve design and all that. I may have been opposed for the rec center, but in the end, the body spoke. Now my job, though, becomes, okay, I'm not gonna do everything I can to keep it from being built, but I'm gonna make sure it's done right, and I'm gonna make sure it's done smart, and we're not gonna waste dollars on it, and it's gonna incorporate maybe some of those reasons why I was opposing it. If, you wanna build a rec center just so you can have indoor pickleball. Well, I'm not a pickleball fan, I'm a basketball fan, and you're not proposing a basketball court, and that's why I was opposed to the rec center. But now I'm gonna really push and say, hey guys, let's try and make this a multi-use facility. I'm gonna make the best of the situation to still keep the community moving forward. Now that's a very simple example where ideally, hopefully things are gonna go. It's never that clean, it's never that easy. But where you can, you wanna try and find that balance. It isn't to necessarily hold up the project. Now, sometimes there is a legitimate reason. Sometimes there is. And that will come out as it moves through the process. And there have been times where I've seen a community start down a road, and then they realize that's not the right way to go. And they've had to double back. And there have been elected officials who will be like, I told you so. I told you so. But don't gloat on it either.
Right.
And don't sit there and say, ha, 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 yeah, run up and down, pointing at everybody going, I told you all, you guys should have listened to me. It is, okay, we went that road, we've realized, now let's regroup. Once again, how do we collectively come up with a good decision that's the best public interest, and try to do it for that. It's really easy for me to sit here and say that. You guys have got the hard work. I know there's going to be subjects. If there isn't already, there are going to be subjects where it is very difficult for you guys to do that. But as best as you can, work together, think, talk to each other, communicate, of saying, here's my concerns and why I'm opposed to something. I want to make sure everybody understands. And that's not easy to do, too. I mean, it's one thing to be able to say, well, I really oppose this because the person who's doing it, I've dealt with them personally in the past, and they're not a good person. They will try to screw us over in some way, form, or fashion. I'm convinced of that. You can't really say that in a public meeting, right? It gets hard to do that. And I'm just, once again, it's a hypothetical example, but you've got to find a way. Unfortunately, you're restrained, and I got a slide that shows this a little bit later. You've got restraints on you that you've got to work within a realm. You have no choice. But you're judged on how this body works together. And I think you would look better to your citizens to say, hey, we have this, I expressed my opinion, we've made a decision, we'll move it forward. I'm gonna be a watchdog on it, but I understand the decision was made, we're moving this forward. And in times, it could be, I mean, your vote could be a 4-3 and accurately represent the public too, which makes it even more difficult out there. That, you go out and talk to 7 random citizens, you're gonna get the same 4-3 division. So you've got half your community that's right on that edge. It can be very difficult, but in the end, you can say, my job is to keep us moving forward though, and we're gonna play this out, and we're gonna see where it goes, and we're gonna do the best we can to make it the best we can. That would be my recommendation. And that's all I can do as a manager, is give you my recommendation. Absolutely, absolutely. Professional staff don't do that. Example before I put my, hey, do we really need all people documents? Can we do something that's flexible so we are accounting for the small players in the community and the capabilities? How is that going? And once again, it's a very simplified example. Your staff can work with all of this.
What point, when we're making these decisions, like how much input do we try and get from the public, what is the mechanism for that? I mean, just for people to come to the board meetings and give them an opportunity to express themselves, or?
Yeah, I mean, once again, it depends. It's going to depend on the subject. It's going to depend on the type of matter. If this is a legislative issue or is it a quasi-judicial issue? There's some legalities that come into that. Once again, your staff is going to help guide you in that process. They're going to provide you the boundaries that, or make you aware of the boundaries you should stay or try to stay. And warn you of, here's the gray areas too, right? It's going to depend on the situation, but yeah, I mean, it could vary. If you guys are having a discussion of should we allow dogs in city parks, in the town parks, right? Yes or no? You're going to hear from everybody at the post office, the grocery store, the library, you're going to hear from everybody on opinion on those. You're going to hear your staff bring information and recommendations from you. You're all going to have your own personal opinions. I got 2 dogs. I think it's frustrating when I go to a community and I can't walk them in a park, right? I'm the responsible dog owner though, because I got my doggy bags with me. I don't pick it up and then leave it there for somebody to pick it up later either. You get those different perspectives. It really depends, but you want to, as best you can. Once again, to that example of my desk here, how are you hearing from different perspectives? And are you hearing from all the perspectives too? And that's one of the things you got to question sometimes are, who are we not hearing from? Who's going to be impacted by this decision that has not communicated to us with a letter or come into a meeting and talk and spoken on themselves? How do we reach out and engage with them? There are books and books on how to do that. Once again, your staff can bring some recommendations. I come in and help communities sometimes to help on difficult subjects like that and say, here's what other communities have done, here's some best practices that are out there. There's a wide range of it, but there's no real, I can't give you just a direct answer on that, unfortunately.
Sometimes we have.
All right, I'm going to speed up a little bit because we're down to 1 hour left and we're still got quite a few to go through. Just elected official constraints, once again, volunteer for the most part. And when I say the most part, some. Once again, I don't know specific for you guys, but I'm guessing if you get any kind of compensation, it's probably very minimal, a couple $100, something like that. A town in our region, their town board just voted, they pay their members $13,000 annually to serve. They're a town that could afford to do that though, right?
To go there.
That was not the town I worked
Katie's
for,
like,
right? You know, type of thing. So you're a volunteer. I mean,
Dang, I could just be a board member.
no,
Now
you
there's-
don't want to trust me. it's,
Yeah.
once again, there's no clean answers on a lot of this. I mean, a lot of what I'm saying and examples I'm giving you right now is the perfect world. Nothing's gonna be perfect. You're not gonna see anything as easy as I'm telling it to be here. You know, the measurable feedback, once again, you don't get a lot of feedback. Generally, you won't have a crowd of 50 people to come in here and celebrate you guys and say, you guys did an outstanding job. And it was amazing. Thank you so much for listening to us and what we did. If you're lucky, you're gonna get 1 or 2 people, or you might get an email from somebody that says that. More likely than not, you're gonna get 30 people in here to tell you how you guys are stupid and what were you thinking and how could you dare make that decision. And then open meeting requirements, once again, you guys are gonna be faced with decisions that you wanna say something, but you have to be conscious. Back to the litmus test. What will this look like on the headlines of a newspaper, right? So you have to think, how do I make my point without jeopardizing something or causing an issue or causing a ripple? Or sometimes you have to make that decision, say, you know what? I'm just gonna take a stand, and I know I'm gonna take some heat for it, and it's not gonna be pretty, and my neighbor is gonna be really upset with me, but it's what I feel is right, and I just gotta suck it up. I mean, that's just the nature of the job you guys have all chosen. Lucky you, right? So open meeting requirements plays in that. Staff constraints, once again, communication, it all comes down to that. Multiple bosses, that's where you pay attention to that hierarchy again of you guys, your communication with the town manager, and then have the town manager communicate and work with your staff. Now, it does not mean you wouldn't say something in a public meeting and be very clear because they're all sitting here and hearing it, but follow that process. And I always talk about the multiple bosses. An example I give is I had a mayor one time. It was the classic, there was a pothole in the street. He got a complaint. He hung up the phone. He was out walking his dog. He happened to be walking by the Public Works office at the time, so he just popped in and he went to the Public Works director and said, hey, you guys got to get the crew up there to fix this pothole. Public Works director immediately came up to my office and said, Patrick, we've got an issue. Patrick, you, as my boss, have directed me and my staff, and we've come to agreement, we're working on this water line project over here. The mayor just walked in, though, and told me I've got to pull everybody off of that project and go fill this pothole over here. It put him in a very difficult position. I told him, don't worry, let me make a phone call. I called the mayor, and I said, Mayor, you need to come talk to me. We can't have this. And the mayor was immediately like, oh my God, I didn't realize, I'm so sorry. I just thought it was a simple pothole. And I'm like, no, it isn't. Here's the challenges we were facing then. We had an underground drainage issue that was creating, it was gonna pull where we had people without water service right now on this water line, and we were basically, it put our public works director in the position that he felt like he was being told, pull people from that to fix this other issue that wasn't just a simple pothole, go throw some dirt into it. It was gonna be a 2 or 3 day fix itself. So we were able to come to a conclusion. I worked with our public works director and said, go ahead and get that done. Talked with the mayor and said, hey, why don't you give this feedback to the citizens you're hearing from. Tell them this is where we've got it in our priority and we'll get to it, but this is what it's gonna take to fix it, because even the citizens didn't realize it wasn't just a simple pothole that needed to be fixed. And we were able to do both, but you gotta watch that with your staff. You gotta just be conscious of it, because it puts them in a difficult position. They of course wanna be able to fix it. They of course appreciated that the mayor was bringing this concern to their attention. It just put them in a difficult position of who do we serve? Do we serve the mayor, or do we do the person who writes our performance evaluation type of thing? So this, I think, is an important slide. Your conduct impacts the effectiveness. That community, I gave the example before of where they were always fighting, and then when they started to come together and work effectively, you saw the ripple effect into the community. You literally saw it. I mean, you could almost do a case study for a grad student in public administration about it. It was a really cool thing, but it does start with you. It starts, and I'll talk about this a little bit more. I'll probably go fast through it later. Some slides on meeting effectiveness. It all starts with the tone you guys create. So pay attention to that. It reverberates through your community. When you guys are in dysfunction, it has a negative impact on your staff. whether they intended or not. It just does, because they just become demoralized. They're like, well, shoot, we're out here busting our butts every day, and the board can't come to an agreement on a decision that we can move forward on. We don't care. Just make a decision, one, left or right. Just tell us, and let us go do our jobs that we know how to do. So you got to be paying attention to that. It all starts with that. Discussion agreements are part of the process, but it's just as much as you can, keep it respectful. I mean, it's not always easy. It doesn't mean you're going to go have dinner afterwards or something like that, but as much as you can, fall back on. You all are here because you care about your community, and that's what we just try and do what's best for your community. Next slide. Dr. John Banyan, I throw this up there, and I got a few other slides, but I'm going to blow through those real quick. We just talked with him a little bit. Katie and I both had the opportunity. We've heard him speak a couple times because he comes to conferences here. He's a professor of public administration at the University of Kansas. What I like about Dr. Nalbanyan is he doesn't just teach it, he lives it. He served on the Town of Lawrence Town Council, and he was mayor of the Town of Lawrence. So he's actually done it, and then he teaches it and works. KU's got one of the best public administration programs in the United States. This is just something he put out there that I think is really important. The ability to deal with issues as a team. Once again, it doesn't mean that you agree, but you collectively say, hey, we're going to work together to find the solution. You are willing to address difficult issues. I can give you examples in communities where elected officials will push off those difficult issues, and once again, they become stagnant, and then guess what happens? They get voted out of office because the citizens don't see their community moving forward. They don't see the true problems being addressed. It is difficult work. Sometimes you got to do that. And then it's that successful relationship with your professional staff. Once again, relying on them to bring that information to you if they're not being clear on why they didn't bring. What is it that you needed from them to help you make the decisions that you need to out there? Keys to successful board partnership. Once again, you guys set the vision, you set the direction, you make the decisions, your staff then carries that out. Next slide. Use your manager and other staff as your resource, but it all comes down to providing clear direction and messaging. And once again, I get into that a little bit more on slides I'll skip over. It really comes down to those motions that you make, being very clear on what you're doing, not just for the public to understand the decision you made and why, but for your staff to understand the decision so they can clearly carry out what you are directing them to do, okay? Next slide. Okay. We good? Keep pushing through? Okay. Local governments, as I said before, health, safety, welfare, you have those things, but you also have these other pieces that local governments, especially in the last 5 to 10 years, have really shifted into. You have safety as a whole, but you have infrastructure and the importance of infrastructure, economy. When I mentioned before about working with my very first city council, and I had 2 different council members who were on the other side, it was over economy. The one council member wanted us to implement a Main Street program and have a Main Street manager, and really felt it was important for the city to develop the economic side of things. The other one was like, no, it's the free market. We stay out of their business. That's the most important thing we can do. We can provide them the infrastructure they need surround it, like good sidewalks, roads, water, sewer, all those type of things. But businesses will do what they want to do and let them get out of their way. That's the best thing that we could do. That's how they were different on those things. And so we did. At the time, we were like, whoa, government doesn't get involved in economic development. That is not the case today. Economic development is on the forefront just as much as infrastructure and safety, and then housing and transportation are the other ones. And I know you guys, as a community, are having conversations on all of those subjects already. Next slide. Just some guiding principles. Challenge the process. It's okay to challenge each other. Don't just do things because that's how we've always done it around here. Ask the questions. What is it and why? Search for those opportunities. Enlist others where you can. Not only just amongst yourselves, but where those partnerships can come into. Before I gave the example before about City of Montrose and how they work with their nonprofits. They have this great relationship with so many of their nonprofits out there because they recognize they're providing services that we're not having to. So how do we support them to do that and make sure that they're successful with those things? Encourage collaboration, set the example. recognize contributions and celebrate accomplishments. Nobody else will do that. You guys are gonna have to do that for yourselves. Next one. With your colleagues, you guys operate almost every community in the state of Colorado. There are a few exceptions, work under a council manager form of government, which once again is you're the elected members of the public to make the policy decisions, and then you have professional staff to carry out those decisions on your behalf. You know, these are just some things you want to keep in there about building that relationship. I would also extend it as it's not just about you also, and just within the boundaries of the town of Bayfield. More and more collaboration is so important. I would say take advantage of those opportunities. Working with the county, working with other municipalities. You guys have been doing that in a lot of things. Once again, when it comes to broadband, when it comes to affordable housing and the RHA, are examples of that. The communities that I saw during the pandemic that collaboratively came together and worked collectively were the ones that came out of the pandemic much more effectively, in a better position. Their businesses were in a better position, their citizens were in a better position, they were in a position organizationally to take advantage of the opportunities that were out there. That all started with that regional collaboration. You guys, for this area, are pretty good with that, but I would strongly always encourage that. Once again, not always gonna get along with everybody, but build those relationships with the county commissioners, build those relationships with the other elected officials in the other municipalities. Take advantage of some of the opportunities that are around in this region, whether it's when CML comes through the region to do their district meetings. Attending the CML conference is a great opportunity to network, meet other elected officials. I guarantee the town of Bayfield is not facing a problem that some other community hasn't faced in some form or fashion in the past. You do not have to reinvent the wheel. It is very easy for us. When I was in Ouray, in our little canyon, the world stopped in our little canyon, right? I can tell you, as much as I tried to always look out into the rest of the world, as I became a DOLA regional manager and I got more exposed to what was going on in the state, we didn't reach out enough. There are elected officials all over that are more than willing to share and say, oh, you're dealing with that? Well, let me tell you about how we dealt with it. And this is what went well for us, and this is where we really messed up. So you want to avoid these pitfalls. Reach out. You have great resources around you with that. Next one. So always ask these things. What is important to you, and where can you compromise? And I know in some ways, going back kind of the party thing, compromise has become a little bit of a dirty word out there in some ways. You know, no, I have to stand for my beliefs. Yeah, that's true to a point, but in the end, all of our relationships are about compromise, right? Whether it's your relationships with a spouse or partner, relationship with children, relationship with social organizations that you may associate with, it all comes down to, let me understand what you're trying to accomplish, let me explain what I'm trying to accomplish, how can we collectively together to work for, as best we can, a win-win for us. Or I had a county commissioner that I worked with for years. He always said, I always knew we made the right decision when everybody was a little pissed off. Because they all had to give a little bit, right? You know, but that's when we were most successful, is when everybody gave a little. And they were a little annoyed, but that's where we came up with the best solutions for our communities. Next slide. Theory of public value. This goes back to Dr. Nalbanyan and some of the work that he's done, including through ICMA. The idea of what's out there, the political support. You guys have determined that it needs to be done, operational capacity to do it, and then building that public support to accomplish it. Those are really those key areas you want to keep a focus on when you're moving forward. How do you get public support? There's some different ways that you can do that. Next slide, sorry. That you'll see in here. In some of these things, I'm going fast because I know we're starting to get on the shorter end of time. So I'm speeding through some of this quickly, and I apologize with that, but I want to be able to say too, if there's any segment of this, I mentioned this at the beginning, there's lots of parts where we could take a deeper dive into these. I'm more than happy to always come back over and meet with you guys. My sons played high school basketball. It's not uncommon for me to drive home at 10 o'clock at night. Now, I'm not driving home tonight. I am staying because it's going to be snowing on Red Mountain Pass. And I've been on too many rescues on Red Mountain Pass in snowstorms. I don't want to go over there during the night, but I'm always happy to come over and talk with you guys on some of these things. Next slide. This next one's kind of important because I want to help you guys to see how all the pieces come together. It's not just, okay, I'm on council or town board now, here I'm sitting at the dais and I gotta make a decision. You have tools that are out there to help you with these things. You have that high level mission and your guiding principles. And I know you guys have been doing some work on that. Then it builds into these other pieces, and all these pieces come together. They're all important parts of it, but it starts with you all, and I said it before and I'm gonna stress it again, setting the vision. You need to set that high value vision of this is where we want our community to go. You have tools that are there to help you do that, like your community master plan. You know, the community master plan is that intent to get public input, to say, where do we see our community in 5 years, 10 years, 25 years? And you utilize that, and that's a tool you use to help you make some of these decisions. It's not just your personal opinion. There are gonna be things that come before you, you're like, I have no idea. I have no idea what the right answer is with that. Fall back on some of these tools that are out there. Establishing that vision is really important, and then allowing, like with strategic planning, you've got to say, this is where we want to go, and then your staff is going to be able to come back and say, okay, to get there, this is what it's going to take. We're going to need X resources, or X amount of time, or X amount of commitment from all of you, financial commitment or support, whatever it may be. Relying on your staff to tell you that, and then it's a negotiation. Once again, you guys are going to say, hey, can't we find a way to do that cheaper? Or how do we balance these 2 or 3 priorities to say, this is the number 1, this is the number 2, this is the number 3? How do you work on that? You know, you could sit there and say, this is a really big priority to us, and your staff will come back and say, well, that's great, we agree with it, but it's going to take us 3 years to do that because of these reasons. Okay, now I understand, it's going to take that time. So what are the other things we can work on in the meantime while we've got that going? I used to work, in my community, our annual budget would ultimately, any of the capital decisions that I presented to the board, I would align to our strategic plan and specific goals on that. So I could sit there and say, you're making the decision on this capital expenditure and this aligns with what you're trying to accomplish here. So it was clear to you all, so you knew what you were approving in the budget. It was clear to the staff because they knew what they were carrying out. And it was clear to the citizens to understand what the direction the council was going. You want to be clear with for your public to understand all of that. And all of these pieces come into that. Next slide. And why plan? Why do all this? Because you end up with things like that picture. You don't want to necessarily have that. You get the undesirable outcomes. And you know, it's very easy to look back and say, okay, here's more mistakes we made than maybe successes we had. But that is where a lot of times you get into this piece of what is it that we did unintentionally, and now we got to deal with the consequences of that. And where, as best as you can, you put together a strategy, a plan. You get the resources to help you make decisions that you can give that direction to put it into a place that you want to go. So with that, I'll look at that last question. And it's a question I want you to ask yourself. Once again, I'm not going to put anybody on the spot and say, you know, what's your answer to this? But look at it. What holds your organization back from improving clarity around goals and direction? And what is one step you can take to make things clear? And I say you, think about it individually, and think of it you collectively as the board. What are those things that you could do? And I ask staff to do the same thing, because staff can play a role in that, you know, of saying, what are those things that are holding things back, and what can be done to make things clear? So next one. All these things come together. They play an important role, creating the vision. Out of that vision comes your strategic plan. Out of that comes your master plan, your code, all these other pieces. And these are all other important tools that are out there to help you. You know, some of them you may be familiar with. Some of them are statutorily required to have. Others like incentives and programs. That's a big one. I mean, communities have really become aggressive in developing incentives and programs to say, okay, this is what we want. Here's our vision. Here's where we want to go. How do we attract people in, or businesses in, or developers in, or whatever it may be that support what we're trying to accomplish? What incentives can we come up to do that? Because once again, you are competing against others. And there are some communities that are just doing it right, and they've got a great strategy. There's also communities that have resources beyond what you can imagine, and they can throw a lot of those resources at it. And there's that wide range out there, so you gotta really think about how all these pieces come together and how you can utilize them and how your staff can work with you on that. Next one. I can't go on without talking about resiliency. The term resilience or resiliency is a term that's been hijacked, and you hear about it all the time. I mean, I saw it on a grocery commercial or something the other day, someone talking about resiliency. I will talk to you about the way we talk about resiliency. It is creating a framework of your organization that can adjust and adapt to the shocks and impacts that are out there, right? It's getting away from the traditional siloed structures that you have and having a structure that can move and adjust depending on the needs and what you're facing and what are the challenges that may come up. When I was in college, I was in Air Force ROTC, and we had this Colonel Makuchi. He oversaw our detachment. Great guy, born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, so you can kind of stereotype the way he talked and the way he walked around and all this. And he used to always say, flexibility is the key to air power. And I've kind of applied that to my life, not just air power, but flexibility is the key to whatever you're being able to do. Have that structure in place that you can build on a strong foundation, but that you can adjust and adapt with the things that are coming at you. And that's hard for us to do in government because, once again, we have bureaucracy that's there to protect the public's interests. But private industry is doing it, and they're really moving fast. When I worked in the private sector, I remember I had this boss, the president of our company, would tell me we have to reorganize every 5 years if we want to stay current in our industry. Now it's every 2 years. Government has to look at it the same way. Now we can't do it every 2 years because, once again, because of some of those structural issues there, but we should always be reevaluating how do we adjust, how do we adapt. These are 4 areas to look at. Identifying your vulnerabilities, taking the long game. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the here, planning for the curveball. What are those things that you're not anticipating? What are those things you need to be out there? And then partnering. Next slide. So identifying your vulnerabilities, skip next slide, 2. Sorry, go back. I'm getting ahead of myself. So identifying those vulnerabilities that you have that are out there, whatever they may be. Obviously, it's always easy for us to pick some of the big ones like natural disaster, drought, wildfire, flooding, some of those things. But what are those other vulnerabilities out there? Affordable housing has come to the forefront. Shifts in the market and the economy, what does that look like? If you lost a major employer in the community, what would that look like? Just where are you as an organization and how can you adjust and change to whatever those challenges would be? Now, next slide. This idea of the long game, what is your North Star? What is that that thing that you're focusing on in the big picture? Once again, coming into that vision, that cool thing of where do we want our community to be? And we're going to make our decisions based on getting us to that point. And always, because you're going to have all these things coming at you. The whole idea of the North Star, sailors used it through the seas and how to navigate, right? Storms would hit them and whatever, and they would get knocked off of course, but then they would refocus and find the North Star and be able to realign their alignment. It's the exact same thing in what we do and day in and day out, and keeping that in mind. Next slide. Like I said, planning for the curveball. What are those things that are out there that, it was funny because about 8 years ago, I was involved in an exercise about a pandemic. And it seemed so outrageous that nobody was really taking the exercise serious. Now, 8 years later, I look at it, it still seems so freaking outrageous. Oh my God, what did we go through and what did we have? I mean, I never would have thought I would have had to live through what we went through, what all of us went through, right? So you got to sit there and say, okay, what's realistic? Now, you may sit there and say, okay, do we plan for aliens landing? Probably not, but I don't know. What I've seen in the last few years, I don't know if it's so quite out there on the fringe, but you start planning on those things of what does it look like if we had a major employer or some major impact. Or, you know, a lot of communities right now are dealing with the migrant issue. Is, you know, city and county of Denver dealing with all these migrants that are arriving by buses, right? And now some of those migrants are starting to move out, and there's other communities that are saying, I never would have had to think I would have to deal with all of a sudden 50 migrants showing up on our doorstep, and how do we handle that? So maybe we should have a strategy of what do we do? How would we recognize it? Who would we reach out to? Let's just at least have a plan. Going back to my fire department background and training, we always say you got to have a plan A, a plan B, a plan C, and you're working on plan D and plan E at the same time, right? You've got to have those plans that are out there. So think about those things and what you can do for your community. Next slide. As I said, you can't do it alone. This is actually a picture from La Plata County working on their resiliency plan, and some people that from the community that were involved in that. It was partnerships. When they developed their resiliency plan, they brought in a wide range of people. I think they avoided, if I recall right, this was some years back, there was like over 40 different entities represented in the conversations, including the town of Bayfield at the time, were involved in developing the resiliency plan for the county of, you know, from housing to nonprofits to public safety to schools to, you know, contractors, private industry, banking. I mean, there was a whole wide range of stakeholders that were involved. Next slide. Always more and more, you know, once again, I'm not in a position to talk on the politics aside and saying diversity, equity, and inclusion. Some people start to put up some defense to that. I look at it from this way is always be thinking about who is that part of your community you're not hearing from. I said it before, you know, who are some members of your community that are maybe underrepresented or not represented necessarily. And that could be a wide range. You know, the default is to go back to the migrant population. Okay, there's that obviously, but what about senior citizens? What about youth? What about, you know, you're homebound? How about people that have special needs or whatever? You know, there's a wide range of those groups out there. Be looking at them all the time and saying, how do we engage with those members of our public more? It's not because, oh, that's the latest thing to do. No, it's the right thing to do, right? It's reaching out and just hearing from people. You're not going to be able to incorporate everybody's opinion and thoughts at all times, but at least making the effort to try and include where you can is really important. Next one. Once again, the importance of your organization's values and the statement that you build with that. We all hear excellence, transparency, fiscal responsibility. Those are standards. Take that deeper dive. That's one of the things that, you know, when we do our resiliency training, I always talk about it's going deeper. It's taking that next step, 2 or 3 layers into it, and thinking about it, because this is a point I want to stress to you guys. The decisions you make aren't just about today. They will impact your community today, but they will impact your community a year from now. They will impact your community 5 years from now. They will impact your community 25 years from now. I guarantee there are things that will be coming before you that your staff is going to be going back to say, okay, the town dealt with this 25 years ago, and what was the decision at the time? And let's understand what the thought process of the elected officials at the time were in the decision they made. And is that still relevant today? And what does that look like into the future? And there will be boards 25 years from now trying to interpret and understand what the decisions you guys are making today. So that mission, and once again, think about these questions. Go back and look at this later. Why are you here? Who do you represent? How do you interact with each other and your constituents? And how do you communicate with your, all the above, okay? Next one. I've got some scenarios in here that I try to usually keep you guys interacting with. I'm not going to use all of them, but I'm going to start with one here. So read this scenario and then tell me which option you think is the proper one. Anybody gotta throw it out there, what they think the answer is?
C.
See,
C. Right. Some would say B too, that comes up once in a while. I'd say, yeah, but you gotta go a little deeper and explain why, and that's where C does with that a little bit. And reason being, and going on, next slide, let's get into a little bit about the meetings. Necessary tools, right? It's not just about you. Obviously, you guys are the critical component because you're the decision makers, but it's also everything you do has to be in the open public so the public can understand what you're doing. Now, it doesn't mean, going back to citizen participation, that they're gonna go, oh yeah, I know you guys thoroughly talked about this and you've investigated it and I understand exactly what you're trying to do and why you made the decision. But you wanna make sure those tools are there, not only for your sake, but for them and their opportunity. The most important of this, to me though, is that emphasizing that last line. Your staff puts a lot of work into putting together the agenda for you for a meeting. Your staff as professionals, their job is to say, here's the decision item, here's different perspectives to look at it. Hopefully we're objective when we do that as staff members, but we're human, right? And then here's a professional recommendation. It's your job though to take the time and respect the work that went into that. Don't just come to the meeting and open your packet for the very first time as you're sitting down there at the start of the meeting. Take the time to do the research. There's a lot of work and effort that goes into it. Now I understand there's times that things aren't always possible to do that. Life comes into play, whatever it may be, but where you can, take the time to be prepared for your meetings. I can tell you it is very demoralizing for your staff when they put a lot of work into that and then they know when you come into it. The other side note is I had a city council member who would also used to come drunk to the meetings. That wasn't good for morale either. Try to avoid that if you can. Those things happen, but talk about those things. And then with that work that you're reading ahead of time, you're gonna start to have some questions and start to think about, okay, what are the questions I wanna bring forward as part of the meeting, as part of the discussion? But a lot of times, you may have some questions that are very specific that you want to ask ahead of time. Go talk to Katie. Most managers, and I'm guessing Katie's like this too, the day of the council meeting, or the board meeting, she's gonna be available most of the day to answer and field questions from you. And it may not just be a question, it could be, hey, I'd really like more information about this. Can you have Mark be there to talk on this a little bit more? Make sure he's prepared that I'm gonna ask a question, that I wanna do this, I wanna take a little bit of deeper dive in that. Share that with her, or say, hey, can you explain the financial analysis of this a little bit and how you came to this return on investment number and why you're doing it? Ask those questions. Now, sometimes there's appropriate questions you want to do in the meeting because it's information you want to have for all of you, right? But sometimes it's just you, because I think I had on one of the other slides there, there's never a dumb question. There's questions that you feel dumb about asking. It's not that it's a dumb question, you just feel kind of dumb about asking. By all means, come and talk to Katie. Katie could absolutely say, you know what, that's a really good question, and it's probably a question that the rest of the board members have. Let me make sure I bring up that answer, or I address that during the discussion tonight at the meeting. Once again, having that dialogue. You want to try and avoid as much as you can surprising staff, surprising each other. I used to tell my staff all the time, there are no good surprises in the world. There are very few. I mean, everybody's like, well, a surprise birthday party. No, when you're on the receiving end of a surprise birthday party, they're not always as fun as you think they are, right? There's very few good surprises out there. Most surprises is like, no, why didn't you tell me ahead of time so I could be prepared for that, right? Or sometimes things do come up though in a meeting, and you know, I know this is a surprise. I know I'm kind of throwing a wrench into this, but this came to me. I didn't have enough time to communicate to you guys. Can we get more of this information, realizing you need time to go back and get that information? And maybe we be appropriate to table this. Let me discuss this with the rest of the board. I mean, there's ways you can do those type of things, but make sure you're doing your homework ahead of time so you can do your well-informed decision, because your community is depending on that. Next slide. Another quick scenario. So you've been so busy, you didn't get a chance to review your packet before the meeting. Which matter is coming before you that requires a vote? What should you do? Do not show up to the meeting. I can tell you right away that's the wrong one. Do A. Please still show up. Contact staff to find out if there will be a quorum. Ask if they can give you an overview of the topic, or email the other board commission member before the meeting to get their thoughts on how you should vote. Out of those three, and they all say A.
They
so
all say,
I just saw
I'll
that.
choose A.
I just
Middle
saw
A.
that. Besides A, B or C, what do you think is the appropriate answer?
The middle one.
I
Yeah.
agree.
B, not C, and I'll touch on that here in a little bit. B is the appropriate one to do. Just real quick, meetings, regular meetings, your regularly posted meetings, same date, same time, or same day, same time usually. Your community depends on it. They expect those meetings to be there. They know when they're gonna be there. It doesn't mean they're reading the agenda. It doesn't mean that they're not gonna wanna talk about something that's not on the agenda all those times, but just regular meetings are very important. That's where the majority of your work gets done. 99% of your work gets done in regular meetings. That's where you make your decisions, and everybody depends on that regularity for those meetings. And of course, they're all open to the public. Next one, special meetings. Those special meetings, we do have special meetings on occasion. They're important. They're usually related to time-sensitive issues, often emergency-related or response. You have a big flood, takes out a bridge. It's a critical artery for transportation and access for the community. Staff went out, got a contractor, got a price on it, but of course they need approval on the budget. We could wait 2 weeks till our next regular meeting, but once again, this is an emergency situation. Maybe a special meeting is called to do that. I always advise, if you have a special meeting, because it's not part of the regular schedule, if you have a special meeting, that's fine, you take action. It's usually related to only 1 or 2 business items. You close that meeting. When you have your next regularly scheduled meeting, take extra time to not just review and approve the minutes from the special meeting, but to explain to your public why you had a special meeting and what action was taken in that special meeting. It's kind of that little extra transparency step, because there will be people that think, oh, you guys are having secret meetings behind closed doors and you're doing it when we're not around. Next slide. Work sessions, what we're doing today. No action is actually taken of any kind, but this is an opportunity where you get the chance to take a deeper dive into particular subjects. It's not uncommon, especially with complex projects, especially capital projects, whatever, you'll call for a work session where you can take a deeper dive, talk to the consultants or the engineers that are coming in, talk to your professional staff and why they're making the recommendations they are. Educate yourself on a particular subject and how important it is, so that when you are making decisions later on, you're not having to start from square one. You can say, okay, we've got this base knowledge and understanding of this. Here's the particular matter that's before us that requires a decision. Executive sessions are important. That is the exception of when you can have a closed door discussion. You can only have a discussion. You cannot make any decisions on that. You have to be very careful how you do that. I would always advise your attorney should be involved with an executive session from beginning to end, meaning I've gone so far, I've had attorneys who I work with that they actually write out the motion to go into executive session and citing very specifically what statutes you're related to justifying for the executive session. And then even once you're in executive session, they would read out some verbiage that needs to be to document who's a part of the executive session, who's participating and what. It's all recorded in the record on it. They are intended to be closed doors. You also always allow, I don't know if you guys do, I would always allow my attorney to hold and retain the recording for executive sessions, because those recordings have a different retention schedule than regular recordings for regular meetings, and you can rely on your attorneys to get rid of those when they're supposed to be rid of. You have to be very careful though. Once again, you're not making any decisions that you don't look like also you're coming out of executive session to regular session to make the work and look like you're just rubber stamping a decision that was made in executive session. You have to be careful with that. If you are not, you are subject or possible that that executive session becomes public. And even though you're in a closed door, you still want to be very, very careful what you say. There was a county some years ago that was looking to fill some planning commission seats, They went into they interviewed candidates. They went into executive session to discuss it. The county planner was a part of those discussions. In that meeting, the planner expressed his personal views about some of those candidates for the position. They then went on and talked about other things that were not part of the executive session. The newspaper sued. The judge ordered the executive session to become public. And it was the front page of the paper of what this town planner thought of all these individual candidates. 2 weeks later, that town planner, or that county planner, sorry, was no longer working for that county. You gotta be very careful with what happens in executive session. Those are the categories that you can have executive sessions. Next slide. 2/3 vote needs to occur to go into executive session. Once again, no formal action, and the recording must be kept for 90 days. And then, of course, slide 101. Once again, you guys are going to have 101. You got to be just very careful about open meetings. It doesn't mean that two of you can't have a conversation about something, but you want to be very careful about that. Avoid it where you can, but sometimes it is appropriate to do that. More often than not, I recommend bringing in the town manager as part of those discussions, because they can help guide you and say, yeah, this is fine, you guys are discussing that, or no, this is starting to get bigger, we need to make sure the entire board is a part of this conversation. Sometimes you don't want to bring the town manager in, I understand that, that's fine, but you just want to be very conscious of it because of open meetings law and ex parte communication. Next
I just
slide.
had a quick question on executive sessions.
Sure.
They have to be noticed.
Well, no, because there are times where maybe on a fly a decision is made to go into executive session. For example, the more common time is you're having a discussion on a controversial topic and you're starting to push up against a legal issue and you need some legal advice from your town attorney. And so you could actually make a motion right there and say, hey, we need to go into executive session to get guidance from our attorney. Or sometimes your attorney will say, hey, can I recommend that you consider going into executive session so I can give you some legal advice? And then they have to call it. Now, where you can, yes, it's best to have it published on the agenda, but it doesn't have to be. No.
Okay, thank you.
You just have to have the criteria of, you got to cite for one of those specific criteria to go into executive session. You have to have.
So the one thing that we've had is Matt Roan sued the town of Bayfield because they didn't read the actual CRS section. And so after conversations with CIRSA, we went ahead and paid Matt, and he's been all over the Southwest Colorado doing that. So that's our attorney is kind of taking a different stance on that.
Yeah, once again, I'll always default to your attorney. I would just say there are times maybe where, like you're in a heated point and you start pushing up on a legal issue and you need some legal advice, and then you would want to do it. But for most of those other subjects, yeah, you should be publishing it at exactly that point. I mean, it should be written out on the agenda per CRS 32
Right.
whatever the numbers are, C2C guidance or in negotiations, or something like that, related to, to establish negotiation points related to discussions to acquire this specific piece of property. I mean, you want to be pretty specific. And then, once again, all those steps of procedures that you do of, you only discuss that subject, you come out, you don't make any decisions, you just get advice or you get information in that executive session. So, yeah, it gets ugly. And you're right. I know Matt's been going around doing that to people, and that's a whole other discussion. That's a discussion over beer sometime. Okay.
Ex parte communication, just a quick clarification.
Yeah, I'm going to get to that one
Okay.
real quick. So
Great.
go down the next couple slides here. One more. So types of action. You have legislative. That's more of the, once again, broad discussions. Do we ban dogs from our public parks? So, something of those public facilities. Quasi-judicial gets into much more related to rights and obligations of individuals. So land use is the most common thing, but you will have a public hearing on, so public hearings, that's what all your quasi-judicial is, right? So you do a public hearing on your budget. You'll do public hearing regarding the liquor licenses. Mostly though, it's related to land use issues. There are once again, I can't think of some of the other examples, but the majority usually are land use. So skip ahead. I'm gonna skip ahead of the public hearings, or excuse me, no, public meetings, next one, public hearings. So this will start to get into ex parte. So public hearings are very formal. Think of a courtroom. You're treating a matter just like a court case, right? You are the judges. It should be very formal and laid out in advance of what are the rules are, that you open the public hearing. You're gonna take testimony. You generally start from your staff. Your staff frames what the situation is, right? Then you turn to the applicant, and the applicant has a chance to respond. Now, in a public hearing, though, because it's public, you're then allowing the public to speak, and you want to control that. You want to have very specific parameters in that, including you're not allowing the public to cross-examine the staff or the applicant. You are the ones that should be the ones answering your question or asking any of the questions. Now, maybe the public brings up a good question. You say, that's a good question. We'll note that. When it's our turn to ask questions, we'll ask that question. You can do those things, but you want to control that. Once all the evidence has been presented, and that usually, once again, goes staff, applicant, public, then you give staff and applicant a chance to respond, allow the applicant to be the last one, then you close the public hearing, and then you go into deliberation, and you guys are deliberate. And at that time, though, you've done taking input from everybody. Now, you can reopen a hearing to gather more information and give everyone the opportunity. You have to be very careful. Once again, I would default to the guidance of your attorney when it comes to hearings with this, because it is very much stacked in the favor of the applicant in the way that they have the opportunity to be heard, and they have that opportunity to address any concerns that are out there. So that's why you always have the applicant to go last. So think of it, once again, as we see, all the court shows that are on TV. The judge opens the hearing, the prosecution starts, they present the case, the defense defends themselves against the case, witnesses are called on both sides, then they have closing remarks. The prosecutor goes first, the defense attorney goes last. The defense always has the last say. It's the same type of process that you guys follow with that. So be careful with that, watch it, no standards, make careful motions when it comes to it. Next one. This just goes into making effective decisions. I'm gonna skip ahead through this. Mr. Mayor, a lot of it falls on you as the presiding officer to keep control of it and driving the effective meeting with that. This goes in a little bit about, next slide, sorry, decision-making. That's where it comes into the strong mayor. Next slide. Improving meetings, here's some things that you can do to make meetings go well. Next slide. Decisions against hurdles. I'm trying to get to the ex parte. That's why I'm going fast through this. Hurdles and mistakes that you can make, not being prepared, not asking enough questions. Don't ask for a vote of the audience. There's ways that you can get and sample your audience. Don't do it during a public meeting because, one, you're not going to have all sides represented in the meeting. Two, the loudest voice wins. That's not the best way to make the decision all the time. You got to be careful that you're not showing bias, especially when it comes to those quasi-judicial. You have to, in essence, come in with an open mind on it. Now that, once again, we're human, and you can sit there and say, just hypothetically, I'm very opposed to alcohol because I was raised by an alcoholic parent, and I know what it did to my family. Well, you got to kind of set that aside if you're approving a liquor license, and you got to listen to the merits and the parameters that you're given in your authority to approve or disapprove a liquor license. So you have to pay attention to those things. And then don't attempt to solve the problem for them. Don't become the architect or the applicant. You could say, we have concerns about this. We want you to go address those concerns. Don't try to come up with solutions on your own. Watch out for social media. My recommendation, as always, is adopt a formal social media policy. Don't ever directly respond individually. Either collectively discuss and appoint and determine a person that is sanctioned to speak on behalf of the town, or more often than not, direct it to staff. If you don't have a public information officer, you have staff that are trained in being a PIO, rely on them to address social media issues. Okay, findings of fact or report, next slide. Related to those quasi-judicial, but I'm trying to get to the ex parte. I can't believe I'm not there yet. Next slide, defensible procedures. Once again, a lot of what I'm already saying here on this next slide. be clear on your motions, be very clear. You gotta outline how you came to that decision. Next slide. Go down. Go down one more. Decision making, we'll go up one more. Decision making. This is just a key point I want to make. A popular decision is not always a good decision, and a good decision is not always popular. That should be a mantra that you keep in mind all the time, okay? And what was it? Yeah, we're gonna skip those scenarios. Ex parte defined. Wait, go down, go down. So, once again, this is really high level. Default to the town attorney. They will always be your guidance. Behind the town attorney is SURSA and their guidance with that. When you're dealing with public hearing, as I said, you have to come in objective to the situation. Think back to that court case again. Say you were a defendant, you're being charged with something. You don't want the judge to have a preconceived decision about your innocence. You want the opportunity for your case to be heard before them in a proper place, and you're hoping that that judge is coming in with an objective mind and will listen to the evidence is presented to them and make a decision and find you innocent, right? It's no different when you're dealing with a public hearing and your applicants are expecting the same type of thing. Ex parte communication is when communication occurs to you outside of that public hearing. So your decision has to be based, when we're dealing with public quasi-judicial issues, your decision has to be based on what is presented as part of the hearing. Not what you've seen or experienced before, not what somebody told you at some other time. You have to rely on what's presented in that hearing. Ex parte is when communication is occurring outside of that hearing and it's happening to you. Skip ahead to the next one. And this is where it is, the idea behind protecting that communication is to ensure the public and interested parties have the opportunity to know or respond to all information. That's the whole point of the hearing. Going back to, once again, the applicant, the defense, they get the final say, the opportunity to respond to it. They have the opportunity to respond to any of the issues, questions, concerns, criticism that have come forward to them on a case. So what happens, next one, ex parte contact. You've got a public hearing matter. You've got a big land use issue that's coming up. Staff will usually, I'm assuming, tell you ahead of time, hey, there's a public hearing. This subject is off limits. Do not talk to the public or each other or anybody about it. Wait for the public hearing. But guess what happens? You're at the post office and somebody comes up to you and says, hey, I want to talk to you about that land use development. Next slide. Here's what you got to do. Stop the person. You got to explain to them, I can't listen to your concerns. I want to hear it, but I can't do it in this realm. You need to come to the public hearing, and then I guarantee the next thing you're going to go, well, I can't. I have to work that night, or I work all day, and my family, that's when we do dinner, and I can't come to the public hearing. Well, then you have an opportunity to submit your concerns or your comments in writing. Submit it to staff. They will make sure it gets to all of us. Don't tell them to give it to you individually, because it has to be presented as evidence during the public hearing. So stop to them, explain that to them, and then tell them, if you continue to talk to me, I can listen to everything you say, but then when we go to that public hearing, I have to recuse myself, and I don't even get to vote on it. So you can give me all the reasons why I should vote against that development, but if I have to recuse myself, what good does it do? And that's where you have to be careful, because if you have ex parte communication outside of that public hearing, and it becomes the light, and you brought your decision onto it, you can nix the entire decision and process that the town just went through. And if it goes to court, the district judge is going to make the town go back and redo the entire process all over again, and you will be recused from being able to participate in that process if you jeopardize that. So you have to respect that piece. And it's not easy, and it becomes very difficult to explain to that citizen when they're like, I can't be there. I just want you to hear what my opinion is on it. I want to hear what your opinion is. I really do. But I have to do it in this formal way. And it gets difficult for our citizens to understand that. But it's to protect the integrity of the process, including out of respect to the applicant, because you're making decisions about private property rights. Is that clear? Is that a very high level, quick
Oh, yeah.
explanation? And some of the things you can do? Okay. No, that does not apply to staff.
We would refrain from
Yes, yeah, now, yeah, those citizens can come and talk to you all they want, but you can't then say, hey, Mayor, let me talk to you about what Joe told me, you know, type of thing. Yeah, exactly, but what you can sit there and say is, hey, can you document that for us? We'll make sure that's part of the packet that goes into the hearing for that. Go down one more.
I think it's important enough